There's a simplicity and an elegance about
Yeah.
materialism initially.
Exactly.
But then you start looking at the specifics of the natural world, and you find, this can't explain. And so, at the beginning, you're attracted by the elegance and simplicity of the idea. At the end, you're left with this
Totally unsatisfying feeling of clunkiness.
Clunkiness.
Yeah.
Is that a philosophical term?
Yeah. So that's very technical. It's only high-level philosophers use that term.
I wonder what that is in Latin. Clunky in Latin.
Yeah, exactly. So that felt really clunky to me. So
Do you think elegance is a clue to truth?
I do. There's a big debate about this in the philosophical literature, but I certainly think that elegance and simplicity are indicators of truth, and for a couple reasons.
Dr. Logan Gage, it is a privilege and an honor to have you on Stunned by Scripture. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. This is fantastic. I am so delighted that you can be here. So delighted to teach with you at Franciscan University. I remember many years ago, my first encounter with your work was, as is going to become evident, we both have an interest in design arguments and that whole discussion. And I was reading some of your essays on Thomism and arguments from design. And having read so many Thomists who were claiming that somebody like Michael Behe is doing something completely different than Thomas's fifth way, and I kept having this kind of facepalm reaction to these arguments, like, no, I think, the particular examples that somebody like Behe is using might be different, but essentially it's the same argument, that you've got purpose, and purpose is the evidence of the mind. So I came across a bunch of your essays. I thought, this is a breath of fresh air. Who is this Logan Gage person? And then the next thing I know, here's an announcement from Franciscan University. New philosophical hire for Franciscan, Dr. Logan Gage. Like, yes, this is amazing. I couldn't have hoped for a better colleague to help form young Catholics at Franciscan. So, this is just amazing honor for me to have you on the show and let you tell some of your story of your own intellectual journey, and a lot of it I don't even know. We've talked about a lot of different things over the years. Talked about design. We've talked about the rationality of Scripture and epistemology and Alvin Plantinga and things like this. But I haven't ever really heard your own spiritual / intellectual journey from evangelicalism, right? From Calvinism, generally?
No, just general evangelicalism. Yeah.
Well, take it away.
Thanks.
What part of the country did you grow up in? What kind of Christianity was your childhood characterized by? And how did you eventually end up, teaching philosophy at one of the premier Catholic universities in the country?
Yeah, well, thanks. Well, it's an honor. It's an honor to be here. So I grew up kind of all over the country. My father he's duly ordained with the American Baptists and the Southern Baptists. He's a minister. But both my parents grew up sort of Assemblies of God, Pentecostal, met at Bible college. And my dad went to Trinity Evangelical Seminary in Deerfield near Chicago.
Good place.
And ministered for decades. We were mostly in Michigan, but I this is like my 11th state or something that I've lived in. Yeah, I think this is now the longest I've ever lived anywhere, which is
me too.
11 years, maybe something like that.
Sure.
So I kind of grew up all over. I ended up in high school, and then I stayed out in Washington State for college. Also, ended up out on the West Coast, and so I kind of grew up all over, and I did get to experience a lot of different kinds of churches between those movements, right? Sort of Pentecostal and Baptist. And then when I was in high school, I was doing a lot of music ministry and leading a lot of praise and worship type services. At one point, I remember in high school I was at 7 different churches, and they were all different kinds of. So I went to high school in Linden, Washington, which is sort of like Holland, Michigan.
Sure.
You know, it's just a Dutch
like
area,
a Dutch colony,
Dutch sort of Calvinist area, which means it has like an infinite number of church splits. You know,
Right.
And so we had over 40 churches in a town of less than 10,000 people.
Definitely.
And so we had first, second, and third. RCA, first, second, and third CRC, and then we had the Orthodox Reformed, and then we had, so we had just an infinite number of splits, and then we had all the non-denominational churches, which had really just split off of like one of the RCA churches,
right?
And so and my dad pastored, the First Baptist Church in this small town, and so I grew up in a lot of different kinds of churches, but as an evangelical, I just kind of thought that we never really settle any of this stuff. Who knows? Calvinism, Arminianism, whatever. So I had looking back, a little bit of a maybe it's a kind of despair, but just a sense that we're never going to settle those things. Those are things that Christians can have opinions about, and so the best we could do is kind of a watered down mere Christianity.
Sure.
That we were never going to get this right, and I think I thought that because, of course, as Protestants, we just didn't think there was an authority that could help us settle these things. We haven't been given. We have the divine inspiration of the Scriptures, but then we sort of have to do the best we can with that inspiration, and we don't have any other help. No, eventually I thought about that and thought, that seems strange that Jesus, first of all, never wrote anything.
Right.
That struck me as strange when I thought about it. And then number two, that we're just sort of left to our own devices when in fact that's not what Jesus says. I mean, he has all this language about, about helping us, find the truth. And it just seemed like a bad plan to me the more I thought about it. I was like, this is like a bad plan that God just like throws this book in our lap. And of course, I had no idea how he got this book.
Okay.
He kind of throws this book in our lap. And we're all just supposed to do the best we can with it. It just seems kind of weird. But so I had questions, but I didn't think there was a way to solve any of these things.
Sure.
I moved to Washington, D.C. about a year after I graduated from college, and.
Okay, whoa.
Yeah.
Going way too fast here.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So, public schools?
Yeah, public school all the way through.
All the way through?
And then I went to Whitworth College in Spokane, Washington.
Did you have any childhood conversion experience? Anytime your faith
So when I was
real?
about 14 years old, we were living just north of Indianapolis. And, I had grown up in church, and if you would have asked me, I would have thought that it was true. But I hadn't taken any sort of personal ownership of that. I think I was a little... I don't know that I was skeptical. I just don't think I cared about it very much. I was just playing sports, and doing kid boy stuff and building forts in the woods or whatever. I don't know. And I joined this youth group though near Indianapolis when I was maybe 14, 15.
Okay.
And this was the first time I'd ever seen people actually like my age that actually cared about any of this. And I was very shocked by that. I thought, whoa, these guys are taking this really seriously. And so through that youth group, it's just an evangelical, youth group. I came to think, oh wow, I need to like take ownership of this in a certain way, and that's when I started to get more serious about my faith. Really read the Bible, really try to study, and then I kind of carried that with me. I moved when I was 15. We moved out to Washington State and kind of took that with me. Made a lot of good Christian friends out there. That was how I sort of got involved in music ministry out there in high school and that sort of thing. And so I think that was something I became very passionate about 14, 15, felt like I had a real conversion and actually thought, hey, I can have like a real relationship with the Lord. Before that, I think I just thought it was this thing that's kind of around and we believe it, but it didn't. It just never hit home before that. And I don't exactly know why, but I think partly finding other young people that actually I thought were like cool. That's how vain I am probably, is I had to find people that I thought were cool that actually believe this stuff. So Is
this the beginning of a prayer life? Where it has like spiritual disciplines?
Yeah, what really helped me was going to a couple of youth conferences where there were just a lot of materials that sort of helped me walk through various parts of the Scripture and sort of start a prayer life. I don't even remember the names of some of these things now, but I just found materials as a young person sort of in the evangelical world that sort of helped me figure out where to even start reading scripture and just, things to just Bible study materials to just walk you through, which on my own because, when I was a kid, I don't know, I think I had read through the Bible when I was a kid. My parents had sort of challenged me to do that. I thought it was kind of dry, most of it.
Right.
People begat other people, and, so it was interesting, and certainly the New Testament was interesting, but I grew up hearing so much of it, so much of it's in my head, but
Right.
So that's not without merit. I mean, that was all there.
Right. And your dad, did you talk with your dad about?
Yeah, well, my dad's an intellectual, and so I always had someone that I could bounce questions off of, which is really, really helpful,
Right.
And especially when I was encountering disagreements between different denominations. I remember too asking my dad at one point something like, "Well, why? So what's the Reformation all about, or whatever? That sounds weird. Why did we do that?"
Yeah.
And and then the basic ideas I recall something like getting back to the early church. It only struck me years later. I'm like, I don't know anything about the early. Wait, we're trying to get back to the early church. Why don't we ever study what the early church said? That seems weird.
Yeah.
So which is funny now in hindsight. All the things that I cared about and all the things that led to my conversion to Catholicism, I had raised questions about those at one point or another. They just weren't systemic. They weren't sort of systematic,
Sustained.
and they weren't driving at this conclusion. They were just odd things I had noticed along the way.
Yeah.
Like where we get the Bible again? Those kinds of questions had arisen for me, but I didn't ask them in a really serious way until much later.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I was involved in all kinds of ministry activities as an evangelical in high school, and in high school, that's when I realized I started to read C.S. Lewis, and I pretty much read everything he'd ever read except for that book on English literature in the 17th century or whatever. But I had to have read like 30 books by him, and I loved Lewis, and I thought that was my first encounter with kind of philosophical thinking and writing, and I thought this is really cool. I want to do this.
Right.
So I pretty much knew by the time I was 16 or 17. I think I want to do philosophy.
Really?
Yeah.
Already discerning vocation as a Christian philosopher.
Yeah.
As a teenager.
Yeah, I was, which is weird, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how I knew that, but I knew that that's what I wanted. I just was really excited by those kinds of ideas and by arguments for God's existence. And I started to read a little bit of, there were a couple books that had come out on Christian philosophers in the 90s that had come out that were sort of partly telling some of their journey and how they thought philosophy fit into this. I ended up knowing a lot of those people later on, which is kind of fun. But I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And I guess I always thought if this faith is going to be sustained, it needs to be pretty intellectually serious. And we need some answers to some questions. I'm just not interested in like. Let's all just believe this stuff and be happy because it works for us or something like that.
Sure.
I'm just not at all interested.
Not satisfied with that.
No, if I thought this thing made us happy but wasn't true, I'd give it up immediately. I just can't, like psychologically, I don't think I can do it.
Can't fake it.
Yeah.
Right.
So I always wanted answers to questions and.
Right. It's a quest for intellectual satisfaction.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And especially because obviously, we grew up in a culture that doesn't take these things that seriously on the whole. And so we're in the position of feeling like we need answers. I think certainly thinking people, and I think I really wanted answers to those kinds of questions about this. Yeah.
Did you ever feel allure to the atheistic materialist perspective? You ever have a draw?
I still feel the allure of it a little bit. Materialism is just such a beautiful and simple worldview in the sense of. Like if it worked, it'd just be great, in the sense of that it's just so simple. It's just all these little whatever the fundamental unit is of matter, energy.
Or whatever.
Yeah, it's like we obviously know it now that it's the story's more. I mean, this is why it's not very satisfying, right? Because originally it's so satisfying. You just get these atoms and they're moving around, and we get some cool combinations of stuff, and you only posit that one kind of thing exists, these material things, and that sounds. I mean, I feel the allure of it, and I know why some of the ancients felt the allure of it. It was this simple thing that there's only one kind of thing, and it can arrange itself into all kinds of cool things, and that's it. It's just it's such a simple story.
Well, this is important because I think a lot of people think that atheism is a modern development. Like we got smart, in the Enlightenment, and suddenly we realized that the gods are a myth, and now we're liberated. This is kind of the Enlightenment narrative. But as you're pointing out, no, there's atheist philosophers in antiquity. You got the Epicureans, you got materialists, you have forms of evolutionary theory that are trying to explain things, from a completely materialist point of view. So
that's something I thought was funny. I didn't realize until later that all this stuff is just there. It's always been there.
It's always been
a perennial part of the human mind that we would. Since people really started, having enough culture and leisure to think about these things, the alternative theory has always been something like materialism. And if you go back and read, Democritus or any of these guys, it sure sounds, or Epicurus, right? It sounds like. They come up with basically Darwinism and the multiverse, long time ago.
Right.
Basically that over time, things are bumping into things, but some of those things don't survive because they're like weird shapes with like necks coming out of their abdomens or something, So not any conglomeration will do. So only the ones that are kind of
survival of the fittest,
formed enough for survival will stay, And by the way, and Darwin's grandfather, right, was into all this stuff. He knew this too. He was an evolutionary thinker of a certain kind and inspired by the ancient atomists. But they also come up with basically multiverse because they realize that this is really implausible unless we have infinite resources to do all this, sort of transmutation. If we don't have an infinite number of trials, this is our worldview is super implausible.
Right.
So they end up adding infinity. So it's sort of atoms floating around in this empty space or void. And then you have to add in an infinite number of trials before you get cool worlds like ours. So there's something that's beautiful about this worldview, but of course, I just don't think any of it works, and I think a lot of it's really implausible, and I don't actually think it's the simplest hypothesis. But actually, what bothers me is that what I see a lot of contemporary atheists today just adding on epicycle after epicycle to that worldview, and to me now it feels clunky. So there is something about at a high level when we think through like what's true, some stuff just seems fitting and harmonious, and other things just feel clunky and ad hoc, it's made up and added to the theory. And that's the way, basically naturalism feels to me at this point. Like we just have to keep adding on stuff. And then to me, it's not that it's not possibly true. It's just that it's so like implausible because it's clunky. You have to keep adding on
it's
ad
got
hoc
a Rube
additions.
Goldberg worldview where you just keep tinkering and tinkering to kind of make this ungainly system work.
Yeah, exactly.
Somehow.
Yeah, when we just thought that, think about, here's like some analogies. So in Darwin's day, when people just thought, Darwin has no idea what a cell is, let alone how complex it is or what's inside of it or how it works. And that's not his fault, he just didn't know. But you can see how under that worldview, you would just think, well, there's these little simple blobs and they kind of glom onto each other, and we get these beautiful complex forms out of these simple little blobs, But when you realize that it's just like complexity all the way down to the cell, the tissue types, to the cell types, and on inside the biochemistry of the cell itself, and it's, to me, that makes it feel clunky. Everywhere you go, you see layers of new order, no matter how far down we go. And we're just going to dismiss that. So it's a clunkier addition to the simple story where we had these simple blobs that could glom onto each other. But now we have to come up with all these complex stories about how we got layer upon layer upon layer of design without a designer.
Right. So there's a simplicity and an elegance about materialism initially.
Exactly.
But then you start looking at the specifics of the natural world, and you find, this can't explain. And so, at the beginning, you're attracted by the elegance and simplicity of the idea. At the end, you're left with this
totally unsatisfying feeling of clunkiness.
Clunkiness.
Yeah.
Is that a philosophical term?
So that's very technical. It's only high-level philosophers use that term.
I wonder what that is in Latin. Clunky in Latin.
Yeah, exactly. So that felt really clunky to me. So
do you think elegance is a clue to truth?
I do. There's a big debate about this in the philosophical literature, but I certainly think that elegance and simplicity are indicators of truth, and for a couple reasons, right? When you multiply hypotheses, they get less probable.
Sure.
And so there's something about simplicity that
Occam's
automatically
razor.
exactly, I mean, don't posit two murderers when one would do,
Would suffice.
and because then you're having to multiply the number of things that have to come together to explain. And so yeah, I think that it is. And Richard Swinburne, the philosopher, has given I think a pretty good defense of simplicity as a hallmark of truth and something that increases the probability. And that's pretty much, it's not universally agreed upon, like in the philosophy of science and epistemology literature, but I think it's pretty decently agreed upon. And certainly people use it as a very practical criterion all the time in the sciences as an indicator of truth.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but we digress there a
Yeah.
little bit. We were talking about but I mean, many adolescents, get to 16, 17, get a driver's license, feel the draw of hedonism, and then I think there's a kind of a moral motivation, like, well, let me dismiss God because that alleviates me from the moral order, and then I can just indulge, I can go to parties and stuff like that. Doesn't sound like you ever fell into that, though, in your personal journey.
Yeah, no, I think I found God at the right time, or God found me at the right time. I think, in fact, I mean, I often marvel at this, that I feel like, I found the faith at the right time, right as I'm going into those turbulent years. And I think I look back now, and you look at friends' lives and acquaintances' lives, and you just think, you've just ruined your life with that stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel very fortunate to have been spared a lot of that by, I don't know, and people make fun of all this evangelical purity culture and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, my wife and I both think like this just saved us so much heartache.
Oh, absolutely.
And people make fun of this stuff now and they feel like it, I don't know, stifled their sexuality or something. And I just think, think about how much heartache this saved
pays dividends
us
in terms of peace and love and tranquility for generations.
That's the thing they don't tell you. They tell you to go out and pursue hedonistic pleasure, but they don't kind of tell you about all the psychological turmoil, the chaos it creates in your life, and the psychological turmoil of being worried people are going to find out, or it just. So I feel really spared from a lot of that. I don't know. I've been thinking about C.S. Lewis's poetry again lately. He has this poem, "Nearly they stood who fall," or "Nearly they fell who stood." Also, and I just think about how close, and I'm sure you feel this way too. In so many ways, how close you come to just ruining your life, because it's not hard. It's all around you.
No, it's
and
very easy to do.
It's just so easy. And I think of all the occasions where God spared me from just making a poor decision in the moment. And just your life could have just taken a totally different direction. So I feel spared from that, especially my teenage years, I found, and God gave me just wonderful Christian friends, that had the same sorts of values and were trying to pursue holiness and cared about these things. And
that's beautiful.
I'm certainly wasn't perfect at it, but I feel really spared from a lot of heartache that you see other people go through, and then you see later. I mean, it's just stuff you don't even think about when you're a teenager.
Right.
How does it affect your marriage? If you were kind of just messing around constantly as a teenager.
Right.
What sort of baggage do you bring into your marriage? And all that kind of stuff. So I feel so spared from that kind of stuff. I'm really grateful to God for that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. So you had a fortunate, kind of providentially, blessed kind of adolescence and kind of the evangelical world. So kind of the in a certain sense, sounds like almost the best of American evangelicalism. Is kind of
I'm
your
very
experience.
appreciative of it.
Yeah. And I think I benefited from that too. A lot of very good positive things, and so you kind of personal relationship with Jesus, and kind of probably implicitly believing the five fundamentals, and all this kind of stuff, and C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. So now comes time to choose a college, and it was Whitworth.
Yeah, so I wanted, I'd only lived in Washington State for 3 years. It's very beautiful out there. My family was still there. My new friends from high school were there, and some of them had actually already gone to Whitworth. So I ended up going there for college on the other side of Washington State, and I don't know. It was a hard time in some ways, but a good time for me. I started to pull back more from the sort of evangelical culture. where and I don't know, I just didn't want to do music ministry full time forever and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of pulled back from that a little bit. I started to actually find a little bit more liturgical church appealing.
Sure.
You know, it's a Presbyterian school, so we had a Presbyterian church on campus that I grew to actually. I had just never been to anything probably that liturgical before, and I ended up really liking it. There was kind of a peace and simplicity about
Sure.
it, and evangelicalism at this time I felt like was going off the rails a little bit in terms of its culture of, I don't know, guitars and smoke machines and skinny jeans and I just, that kind of stuff that it just felt like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And it felt more and more to me driven by, as I kind of intellectually matured, I could see more and more that there was a developing cult of personality.
Yeah.
Well, if
Sure.
Rick Warren said it, or
Yeah.
if so-and-so said it, who's my favorite guru now that lasts
Yeah.
about 3 or 4 years, we keep switching gurus.
Exactly.
I was not into it.
Yeah, I got to just interject
Yeah.
an anecdote. A turning point for me was I was a pre-seminary student at Calvin College, and they bussed us down to Bill Hybels' Willow Creek Church.
Yeah.
What kind of like a massive, pioneer of the megachurch movement.
Yep.
And I sat in on this session that was being led by the guitarist for the praise band for this group. And he was telling all of us there, like, well, you got to listen to Madonna's guitar, I don't know, whether tracks or whatever, because she's got the best guitars and drums, and this is the sound that appeals to the youth for age. And I'm thinking to myself, Madonna?
Yeah.
I mean, and I wasn't a Catholic, so I didn't even have
Yeah.
a sense of how offensive she really was to, what I would, to my devotion to the Blessed Mother now.
Yeah.
But I knew enough to think this woman is quite profane,
Yeah.
and must we go to these profane artists and mimic their styles in order
Yeah.
to advance the gospel? And I was disaffected with that, and I went home, went back to Grand Rapids after that experience, thinking to myself, there's got to be something different.
Yeah.
Right? But anyway.
And I started to have just really mixed feelings about it. This was about the time the evangelicals, or ex-evangelicals who are listening will know what I'm talking about. This is about the time where there started to be coffee bars in all the churches, and you could take your coffee into the service. Now there's something I'm like, hey, if this isn't really a super sacred space because you don't believe, I mean, in hindsight, you don't believe that the body of our Lord is literally in this place.
Right.
Yeah, bring your coffee and, hear a good talk.
Yeah.
I guess we wouldn't object to that at a conference,
Sure,
You're
yeah,
hearing a
but
good speaker and some cool music and you bring your coffee.
Yeah.
And, if that's what you think. But something about it just struck me as wrong. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the way I was raised, I don't know, you kind of wanted your Sunday best a little bit.
Yeah,
and you wanted to
exactly.
sort of, there was kind of a way to honor God by bringing your best.
Sure.
And now it's kind of like, wear your ripped up skinny jeans and bring your coffee. And it's something about that just was rubbing me a little bit the wrong way. I mean, that's not behind my conversion, but it was just, just that culture started to change.
Yeah.
Or maybe I started to notice more and more. I think both. I think both happened.
Yeah.
But I also started to notice it more and more. And of course, as I grew intellectually during those years, I think I found some of the praise and worship lyrics and things just kind of like,
Shallow.
did someone write this on the back of a napkin? Whereas, not that we all have to sit up straight and sing from hymnals all the time. It's not that there's no other kind of music. I don't believe that, but there's something like saying I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you over and over and over. Especially with the kind of evangelical critique of Catholics, having these words they repeat over and over. It's kind of grating on me, But intellectually, I think I started to develop a little bit more there. I was one of those weird people that read every book in college, except for one. There was a sci-fi book I just couldn't get through. And it was my last semester. I just thought, I am not reading this book. I just couldn't do it. I'm just not into sci-fi for whatever reason.
Was it a class in sci-fi literature or something like that?
No. It was supposed to be a great work. I can't remember the name of it now.
Okay.
It's a famous sci-fi book, but
Isaac Asimov or something?
it might have been. It was. It'll come to me, but
Not important.
yeah. It's on the tip of my tongue, but anyway, I think I was just getting burnt out my last semester, and that was that's how rebellious I was at that point in my life, John. There was a book I didn't finish. So I love those things, and I wanted to study philosophy, and
What did you major in?
So I started off studying philosophy and theology.
Double major?
Double major, but then I realized that I just didn't care that much about the theology courses because, again, as an evangelical, I didn't really think that we were going to...
intramural combat.
It felt like an intramural combat instead. You know, I'm like, I don't really care about what Calvinists and Arminians are fighting about. I kind of always cared about what I thought were more tractable and big picture issues. You know, about whether God exists, whether naturalism's plausible, whether religious belief can be justified or has to just be kind of this second-rate sort of belief. So I'm always interested in those really big picture questions. I started to realize my questions are more philosophical than theological. But I realized in hindsight that was partly driven by this sort of evangelical belief that we couldn't really sort those things out anyway.
Sure.
We were just all going to read the Bible and we were all going to have different views about some stuff. It's just that we had these core beliefs that were clear from the Bible and we agreed on those, and so who cares about some of this other stuff? Right. So I've never quite understood the people that are in that evangelical world but then fight so hard about various fine points of theology.
And supralapsarian and all these different
I
views
kind
of
of
the
think
decrees of God, and it's like, you know, you don't have the resources to come to certainty.
I think you don't have any
that.
authority, so how could you ever come to any firm convictions about that outside of... Well, let me give you an example. So when I was in graduate school, I had one of the smartest guys ever in my program was a strong Calvinist guy, and I remember we were at a potluck. We were talking about you know, theology and stuff, and he's like, oh yeah, so I've changed my mind on baptism. I just went and read every Bible verse on baptism. And related to baptism, and then I changed my mind, and here's what I believe now. And I remember thinking to myself, this is probably right around the time of my conversion, that's crazy. That's crazy that you alone, in your own resources, think that you're going to take this super complex work and just sort through it, because you're smart.
Right.
I mean, that feels... he's not an arrogant person, but that approach started to feel totally wrong-headed and kind of arrogant to me, that... Because I knew I couldn't do it. You know what? So as I moved, I first met Catholics when I moved to Washington, D.C. after college. It was the first time I really ever met any serious Catholics at all. I grew up with some Catholics.
What were you doing in Washington, D.C.?
So I started working for a think tank, and we started a D.C. office there. And I started to work and we were housed with another think tank that had all these really brilliant Catholics in it. And it was the first time I had ever met really smart, very serious Catholics. I had never met anyone like that in my life. I didn't know they existed. It was like it was like finding an exotic species.
Yeah.
You know,
this is my experience going to Notre Dame.
Yeah. So the only Catholics I remember growing up, and I'm now in hindsight, maybe it's just all my misperception.
Sure.
But the only Catholics I remember growing up were kind of Christmas and Easter Italians or Irish people in Michigan that. You know.
Yeah.
I remember I went to a friend's Byzantine Catholic church once when I was about 13 in Michigan, and there was like a beer hall in the basement. And I remember thinking, I knew it. You know, like these are heathens. You know? Now I look back, I'm like, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard. Those people had like real fellowship down there. So I moved. So after college, I moved out. I lived in Seattle for a little while. Moved out to Washington D.C. and all of a sudden I'm surrounded by all these high caliber, intellectual, very observant Catholics. And my office actually was right next to the Catholic Information Center there. Sure. You know, downtown is literally like
I'm
across
going there
the street there.
2 days.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm right there on McPherson Square, and so it's like this hub of all these intellectual Catholics coming in and out, and there's talks all the time, and I just was baffled by this. You know, I'd never heard of such a thing, and you know, but that still took me a couple of years to warm up to, like, these guys are serious. Yeah. You know.
Initial suspicion, you're like, there's something got to be wrong here.
That's what it seemed like to me. Like, this is really foreign to all the rest of it. It's harder, and in hindsight, I don't think that's just prejudice. I mean, that was really foreign to all my experience. Yeah. What else should I have thought? You know. Exactly. Now, in hindsight, you realize how parochial and limited your experience can be sometimes, especially when you're inside of evangelical culture. It feels very big. Yeah. And it feels very universal because you can go to almost any town in America and you'll find some evangelical church that's roughly sort of believes some of the stuff most of the stuff you believe. But man, you take one step outside of that, or you started to see it from someone else's perspective, and you realize it's really small and limited and parochial. And so that was my experience, was kind of broadening of my horizons in that sense of realizing, whoa, there's this whole other thing going on. Now, it still struck me, all their claims struck me as implausible, but I thought these guys know Jesus, you know? Right, and so that was shocking to me. And my boss was, is a very smart and winsome Catholic, and he was very patient to me as we would drive into work across the Potomac, and he would we would just, I don't know, talk about something in theology because he was very interested in these things. And there were a couple things that struck me. One was, wow, these guys have actually thought through a lot of this. They have some answers for these things that are at least somewhat plausible.
Sure.
They didn't strike me as super plausible, but like, okay, I could see how someone could think that. And then the other thing that struck me was, I'll tell you what really struck me was, when he didn't know something, he didn't get defensive. He was like, I don't know, I'll have to think about that, or I'll look into that. Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah.
And it really struck me at one point, like, oh no, like he knows this is true. Because that's what you do when you know something's true.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't bother you if, I don't know, if there was a rumor that your wife was an axe murderer. You wouldn't be like, oh no, maybe it's true. You'd just be like, that's ridiculous. That's just absurd.
Right.
And you would, and if they said, how do you explain these facts? You'd be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But
it doesn't matter.
Right.
Because you have so much evidence on the other side that it just little details don't matter. Eventually you might want some answers for them, but you're going to search out those answers from a place of confidence, trying to understand this anomaly, not like, oh no, everything's thrown into question because of a rumor. When you've spent however long, 30 years with somebody or something. So, so that struck me, and their deep confidence. In fact, all of them were that way because they had really thought this through. And so that started to wear on me. And I eventually was at a party and I found a book. Do you remember the what was the born evangelical, born again Catholic book?
Oh, David Curry.
Curry, yes.
Born fundamentalist.
Born fundamentalist, yeah. And that's right. He was born. And I never considered myself a fundamentalist, but the culture he described seemed to me like evangelical culture a decade earlier than mine, or 10, 15 years earlier than mine. And it was recognizable enough to me.
Yeah.
And I just sat down and just like read that whole thing. Yeah. As you can tell, I'm very fun at parties, But I think that stuff was on my mind because I've been having all these conversations with people. And then I just read the first chapter of that book and I was blown away. Like, oh my goodness, this guy's talking about, he kind of collected all the things that have bothered me from different conversations over the previous 4 years.
Yeah, this is the book that did it for my brother.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't read it in years, but it had so I don't know how it would strike. And I don't know how it would strike evangelicals today partly because their culture keeps changing and mutating so much that I don't know that this is the book that would necessarily. But to me, it really spoke to just so many of the basic concerns I had, just kind of anomalies that I had noticed individually in evangelicalism, and that book kind of collected the ones that had really bothered me.
What are 2 or 3 anomalies?
The two, I'll tell you what, in the end, after doing a bunch of reading, the 2 big things that really I thought, okay, I'm going to dive really deeply into these 2 things, because if they got these 2 things right, I'm giving them a lot of trust. Because everything else they said was kind of equally plausible. You get to that tipping point where you're like, I don't think Catholicism is true, but this is equally plausible.
Yes.
So it's kind of a 50-50.
Yeah.
And then I decided, if they know where the canon of Scripture came from and we don't, then that's a really big deal. And that was the one that bothered me the most. And the other one was about the real presence in the Eucharist. I remember I was at a think tank event in 2005, and I was in this sort of debate with another guy after hours, and he had said something like, "Yeah, but everyone always believed in the real presence in the Eucharist," And I was like, I remember thinking that cannot be true. That just can't be. And then I thought later, but if that were true, that's a good reason to be Catholic.
It is a good reason.
So those are 2 things that bothered me the most, and that I really just had to get to the bottom of. And so the one I did the most research on was the canon, because it just bothered me. Because the reason it bothered me so much was thinking, what does sola scriptura matter if we don't have the right books?
Right.
You can't say like the Bible alone if we aren't too sure about what's in the Bible.
Right.
And so, I did as much reading as one could do on that, and just decided like they don't have any good story here. The stories from like Luther and Calvin and stuff are terrible about like it's just all self-attesting or whatever. And you're
Yeah.
like, what are you talking about? And then you find out Luther like wants to throw some books out of the Bible. And you're like, who is this guy? And especially for me as an evangelical who's not really like a Lutheran,
Right.
I never thought of myself as like a follower of Luther, but then you realize that you are following in his footsteps and that this guy's not very trustworthy
Right.
on a number of things. Also, he just, I mean, I don't know if any people have like read Luther, but
Right.
I
He's a piece of work.
He's a piece of work.
He needs counseling.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I literally think he has psychological problems.
oh,
and
yes.
so I don't know, I'm not that kind of doctor, so I don't know how to sort through his issues, or label them. But
a lot of
he
them.
doesn't seem like a super stable person to
Right.
me. And I thought, and this guy wants to throw books at, what are we doing?
Right.
And then to find out they changed some of the wording rather conveniently when he's doing his translation, I just, yeah. So I decided, oh no, we don't have a good story about that. Catholics have a plausible story that there's a magisterium with authority to decide these sorts of things.
Sure.
And what else would it be? I mean, if you think about it, what else would the solution be?
Right.
There's got to be some authority.
Sure. Yeah.
So unless Jesus comes back in person to tell us what the books are,
Right.
then also if the whole idea is that we're supposed to be following the book,
Yeah.
I just don't understand what the plan was unless there was a church that could tell us what the book, because especially when you start to realize, hey guys, this is like developing over a couple hundred years. We need to sort through this and kind of make a decision.
I was
Yeah.
always troubled by the fact that there are no instructions
On how to read this Bible?
Well, that, and a number of different things, but no instructions on like how to set up and run the church.
Yeah.
Right. And the reason there aren't, of course, because that wasn't necessary because the apostles were doing it and you have this continuity.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, you can actually see that. I think that at this point, I can see that in Acts and in the pastoral epistles and so on. But by the time, it was just like I had blinkers on and couldn't see this. And the New Testament is not a manual for church planting.
Yeah.
Because you don't need to have a manual for that because it's actually the church already exists.
But then in hindsight, you realize that insofar as it is there, it like supports the Catholic view,
Right.
So is that in Acts 2 where Matthias replaces Judas?
Yes.
It's so weird because I remember like trying to study and trying to understand why does the Catholic Church believe what it believes, and what's our story about the church, and then realizing that is it Peter there that quotes let another take the psalm, let another take his office, and I just realized like, wait, this is an office?
It's an office, yeah.
An office is something like multiple people fill, and I was like, oh no, like this whole thing about succession is in the Bible. Like I just didn't think that was biblical,
Sure.
So many things in hindsight that you think, oh, there is a scriptural basis for this, but it really bothered me not having a good mechanism to sort out which books are just supposed to be in the Bible. You know what actually sealed it for me? Do you remember F.F. Bruce, the scripture scholar? So this is like the dean of evangelical scholarship in like the 60s, right? In his book on the canon of scripture, at one point he says, I doubt that a new believer, because I think maybe he was talking about Calvin's self-attestation view of like the canon sort of reveals itself to each reader or something. He said something like, I doubt that a new believer would be able to tell whether if they read Ecclesiastes and Ecclesiasticus, I doubt they'd be able to tell which one was the canonical book. Right. And I remember thinking, oh no, that's devastating.
Right.
If we can't just figure this out by reading them, then there's got to be an authority to sort through this. Otherwise, what are we doing? This feels worthless if we don't have some sort of certainty, a high measure of certainty about which books are supposed to be in the Bible. And if we can't figure it out for ourselves, we need an authority. So
this is so fascinating because you're studying philosophy, gravitating towards philosophy.
Yeah.
Now you teach philosophy, and yet the struggle over the definition of Scripture was really central in your own personal journey into the Catholic Church, and wanting like a coherent account of how do we come to know that these books are inspired. So and that is a very philosophical thing where I'm not asking about the particulars of some passage and how it's prefigured in the Old Testament. I just want to know what's our criterion
right, for which books are in and which are out. And then you look at all the ones that have been proposed by Protestants, and you're just like, yeah, none of those work.
No.
Like, none of them work.
It's really bad.
You're just going to end up, because I heard all these things growing up about different ways the canon was chosen. And by the way, most of what I heard was just ahistorical.
Yeah.
Bruce Metzger's book, his book on the canon of scripture, I don't remember what it's called, but that disillusioned me too, because one thing he emphasizes in that book is we need to not just like come up with a new criterion, we need to actually look and see what they use. And his whole point was like they used the canon in the sense of like where we get the word from, the sense of the sort of rule of faith that was already established, like tradition basically is what we all use to decide whether the books were canonical.
Right.
And when I realized that I'd been thinking about this backwards.
Right.
Well, we just get the Bible in place, then we decide all our theology. It's like, but the Bible itself historically was chosen because it fit with the theology.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we know these like, supposed gospels. We know that those aren't real because they don't fit with the entire like tradition of faith that's been handed on.
The deposit
of faith. And so realizing, so first of all, we don't want an ad hoc criterion. We want to know what was actually used.
Sure.
But then even on their own merits, some of these things that I heard growing up just don't work. Like, I don't know, use the ones that quote other scripture or those kinds of things that you had heard.
Nobody quotes Esther.
Exactly. And you're just like, oh no, like that can't be right.
Yeah, no.
It's
clearly wrong.
Yeah. So none of those criteria seemed workable to me. The ones from the reformers didn't seem workable to me. And then it all seemed ahistorical anyway. That wasn't how these were actually chosen.
Right.
Like there was like a church that decided these based on usage and whether they fit,
Yeah, tradition passed through the liturgy.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, I mean, are these things being used across the churches in the liturgy? And it's like, oh man. But that just makes you realize that the church is prior
to the scriptures.
And then you look at what Jesus did. It's like he didn't write any books. He started a church.
Right.
No
Protestant would do that.
I know. We would write the book and then we'd say, stick to the book.
Right.
Yeah. So that was part of my journey. And then reading the church fathers on the real presence. Reading the earliest church fathers like Ignatius of Antioch really just blew my mind.
Yeah.
I literally read them and I just thought this is just obviously Catholic.
Yeah.
If other people have other reactions, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue with you, I guess.
No.
But I look at it and I'm like, okay, they're talking about trusting the bishop, real presence in the Eucharist, regeneration through baptism, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, guys, come on.
He's the one that did it for me.
Yeah.
I was reading this, like, these are all the axioms of Catholicism.
Totally.
I thought in terms of geometry, you start with your axioms and then you can drive everything, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, give me this. Give me Ignatius of Antioch. The whole rest of Catholicism kind of just follows from this. You can figure it out and so on. And, at his letter to the Smyrnians at the end of chapter 6, where he says, "Stay away from anyone who refuses to confess the Eucharist to be the flesh of our Savior Jesus Christ." Like,
I know. I know.
Oh my goodness.
And what's that written before? Before 110?
Yeah, it's like 10 years after the death of St. John.
Yep.
It's like 106 or something like this. He's in living contact with the Apostle John, and anyway. So what year was that when you're reading these?
Let's see. So I moved to DC in spring of 2005. I'd say it took me about 3 years to warm up, and then those last 2 years I was there. So 2008, 9, 10. I guess we entered the church Easter 2010 after we moved to Waco, where I was going to graduate school. We were kind of on our way in. My wife had had a very intense job as a lawyer in DC, and so I was just a little bit ahead of her on the reading. Like she was interested, and we would talk about these things, but just not enough like mental capacity to handle, because it's an emotionally loaded thing, obviously, right? Yeah. And hard for our families and all that. And so I was a little bit ahead of her on the reading, even though I think she knew we were on our way in one way or another. And so when we moved to Waco, I was like, why don't you just like work at Starbucks? Right. And she was like, this is the greatest thing I ever heard. And I was like, read and think about these things. And it didn't take us that long of kind of catching up. And so that would have been 2009. And we found a great church and a fantastic priest when we got there. I mean, the truth is, if we had you think about these contingencies. If we had just found some terrible priest when we got in there.
Yeah, it might have derailed
the whole thing. Yeah. And luckily we had a fantastic priest who actually did his doctorate in Southern Baptist ecclesiology.
No kidding.
Yeah, because he's there at Baylor, so he was like, I'm very, I'll know this
As
thing.
a Catholic?
Yeah,
you did? Oh,
yeah. So,
Fascinating.
fantastic priest. And
So you're working
that
for
was
this think
helpful.
tank in
Yeah.
D.C.,
Yep.
and then you decide, I want to go get a doctorate in philosophy.
Exactly.
Why did you choose Baylor?
Yeah. So I always kind of wanted to do a doctorate in philosophy, but my plans just sort of got derailed. I didn't get into one of the graduate schools I really wanted to get into. And so I was like, I'll just go work. And so I worked for this think tank for 5 years. And that was good. That was good for my intellectual growth. And I got to do a lot of writing and research and event planning and liaison work on Capitol Hill and that sort of stuff. So I feel like I learned a lot and got to experience a lot. So I'm really grateful for that in hindsight. But yeah, I chose Baylor because, they had just top-notch, like, people that did philosophy of religion, which is what I'm really interested in, philosophy of religion and epistemology. And so, they had Alex Proust had just moved there from Georgetown. I got to know him a little bit in D.C. when I was there, and then he moved to Waco. Trent Doherty, Stephen Evans, Robert Roberts, a lot of really good people that do philosophy of religion, epistemology, ethics. And in hindsight, that was really a good decision for me. I wouldn't have been, I got to do a lot of traveling and presentation work when I was in graduate school. They had really good funding for us, which I'm really grateful for. And I got to meet a lot of other graduate students and spend time at a lot of other graduate programs, and I would not have been very happy anywhere else, basically. I was able to ask all the questions that were really on my mind instead of having to hide all my views. Right. So in the seminar room, when we're hashing these things out, I can actually say what I think, and I can ask the questions that relate to the faith and these sorts of things so that we could work through them. And most other programs, almost any other program in the country, you can't really do that. Yeah. So I'm very grateful to have been there and feel like I got really top-notch training. I think partly we knew that we didn't have the best reputation either. So as a graduate student community, we really worked really hard at publications, presentations, professionalism. Right. We would meet every week to hold paper sessions where we'd help each other improve papers, critique them. It was very much from a sense of helping each other get better and not just competition like you hear about in so many graduate programs that just seem gross and competitive and not helpful. So I'm really grateful for that culture there. And at the end of the day, we basically ended up having like the greatest job placement in the country. Yeah. Because we worked really, really hard at professionalism and publications and all that sort of stuff. So I'm just so grateful for the training that I received there, and very grateful for it.
Turned out great. So what did you end up doing your dissertation on? Yeah,
so I wanted the best advice I ever got was choose something you care about, but that's not your baby.
Okay.
Because otherwise you won't finish it.
Right.
And I was determined to be out in 5 years. Just get it done.
Yeah, me too.
You know how it goes. Growing family. You just got to get out of here and get a real job.
Out of here and get a job.
Yeah. So I worked on the theory of evidence in epistemology as to what constitutes evidence and sort of what evidence consists in, and sort of epistemic rules about how evidence justifies, basically. Because I just thought that's something that's widely applicable. It'd be really nice to have a theory about what evidence is and how it works. You can apply that to almost anything. Right. And so I feel like it's given me a good background for just thinking through some difficult issues when I think, okay, what is the evidence here, and so forth.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so how do we know things?
Exactly. And most importantly, I'm mostly concerned in epistemology with sort of the justification of our beliefs, which you might think, most contemporary epistemologists think is like a component of knowledge, so that, you have to have some sort of justification in order to know something. Otherwise, you just you might have a true belief, but you just got lucky. Yeah. Because you don't have it, it's not grounded in anything. And so I'm mostly interested in that justification component. Yeah. And it's a little bit, so when we say justification here, we don't mean like moral justification, but we call this epistemic justification, meaning is this sort of a good belief for you to hold? Right. And people like me think that basically evidence is what justifies. Okay. Other people have other theories, but I think they're crazy. But evidence justifies, and that roughly evidence is something like, your total perspective, all the information that you have that bears on this question would be your evidence for that. And ideally, what we want is a match between our belief and the evidence. Sure. And if you have a match, then you're justified to some degree, in believing that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you're in Baylor. So you came into the church
Yep.
shortly after getting to Baylor.
Yep.
And found a great Catholic community.
Yeah.
In
But most people
Waco.
don't know, by the way, it's like 20 to 25% Catholic.
Oh,
And there's a
yeah.
beautiful student center right on campus.
It's a pretty significant
and
Catholic
with a priest.
presence.
Yeah, it's great.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of your committee members is a famous revert to the Catholic faith.
Oh yeah, Frank
Yeah,
Beckwith. Yeah.
Frank Beckwith, who's spoken at Franciscan
Yeah,
before.
yeah, he's great.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's right. He came into the church just a couple years before me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of those guys that I used to work with, Frank Beckwith, Jay Budziszewski, Rob Coons, Jay Richards, all those guys converted before me, and I just thought, what is going on here? And especially when the three natural law guys converted,
Okay.
I was just
Who are those?
so I was thinking Jay Budziszewski, Frank Beckwith, and then Rob Coons had written on natural law stuff too. I just thought, what is going on here?
Yeah. I went to Notre Dame,
yeah.
and Charlie Rice taught at the
Yeah.
law school, and he won so many converts. Evangelicals would come to study at Notre Dame Law School,
Yeah.
and he had a class on natural law that inevitably, every year would bring people into the church.
Yeah.
Now, what is it about it, do you think?
So without a sense of natural law, so Catholic ethics, I think, at heart, is based on the idea that there is a preset nature out there that we need to conform ourselves to, and we can know that by reason,
Yeah.
right? And what that means is that these aren't a bunch of arbitrary, like basic morality anyway, it's not a bunch of arbitrary rules made up by God. But if you don't have a sense of the way that nature is, and this is why it's kind of important that many of those reformers didn't really like the concept of nature very much, I think they thought of it as taking away, because remember, like this voluntarism,
Yeah.
theological voluntarism, the idea that God sort of God's will is behind absolutely everything,
Right.
and that God just gets to choose stuff because he's like the supreme
Right. It's kind of
king of
arbitrary,
everything.
almost Islamic. Yeah.
It does have that Islamic feel. Actually, there's a couple things that make that period feel like Islamic theology, by the way, not in the period of Reformation theology there. And one is that sense of voluntarism, and the other is something that goes along with it, is that sense of occasionalism, that God's really causing each and every discrete event by himself.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that mixed in with some of that theology of the period. But natural law arises from the sense that nature really is a set way, regardless of how we think or what we say. There just is a nature out there, and if we live out of conformity with it, we're just going to run into trouble sooner or later.
Right.
And the beauty of that is that we don't have to say that all of basic morality is like arbitrarily made up by God. It's like God's given us the instruction manual that fits the way the parts are made. The way it's like but we can also know that by reason, right? I mean, you can tinker around with your car, and not any configuration will make it run.
C.S. Lewis assumes this essentially.
Totally. And so there is a sense that basic ethics is knowable apart from divine revelation because nature is knowable apart from divine revelation, and morality just consists in fulfilling our rational human nature by choosing well within the circumstances that we find ourselves, using our rationality to choose what's good, not what's evil, and not so we choose things that help human community rather than harm it, because human community is obviously a good to be preserved. We don't lie because it breaks down trust and it doesn't seem to use our reason well. We're using our reason to manipulate rather than to speak truth, And so when you realize that there is a nature out there, then you realize, whoa, like Catholic ethics has sort of been right all along about this, whereas a lot of Protestant ethics sounds a lot more like God made up some rules and you got to memorize them and just live them.
Yeah.
And so we get this great idea, right, in all those great medieval philosophers and theologians that grace builds on nature. There is a nature, and we can know things at that level. And then the things that come in by grace and revelation, those are things that build on, will not contradict that foundation. And it's one way that we can test. This is what I tell my students all the time. We can test revelation this way too, right? Like, God's not asking you to just blindly be like, okay, whatever you say, without any sort of means of testing whether this even is revelation. because there's all kinds of claims of revelation. Muhammad claims of revelation and whatever. And we can test those spirits in a sense by figuring out whether they line up with what we know by reason.
Yeah.
So if some new religion, whether it's Islam or Mormonism or whatever, tells you that something is good that you know by reason is not good,
Right.
then, so it tells you to blow up innocents, or it tells you that you can have, 27 wives without consequences.
Okay.
Like those are just things that like you can know by reason aren't good.
Yeah.
Okay. Not that now we gotta be careful about that, because when we say that we can know them by reason, we don't mean that they're all easily and perfectly knowable by everybody under every circumstances, regardless of our background and training.
Sure.
If you're brought up by terrible parents, you might have a really hard time with
skewed
basic,
view.
skewed view of what's good.
Yeah.
But in principle, these things are knowable, right? Which is
Right.
why these cultures converge on the same moral rules,
Right.
because the same sorts of things fit our nature across cultures,
Right.
And so I think the reason that leads to Catholicism is, again, because Catholic ethics presumes that there's a backdrop of nature against which we can use our reason to discover what's good. And then revelation will build on that and may, add to, so Jesus might further say, not only, you already know you shouldn't commit adultery, but don't even like look at a woman with lust. Jesus might add a kind of rigor, but he's not like saying, hey, you thought you knew this by reason, but I'm going to give you brand new arbitrary rules.
Right.
And so Catholic ethics just presumes this, whereas it seems to me that a lot of Protestant culture has not assumed that we can know. And in fact, like the Bardian traditional, those guys were very hostile to natural law, to natural reason in general. And so this partly goes back to the idea that we're so depraved and fallen that all of our faculties are just all messed up, and God's got to kind of come in and zap us.
Right.
Rather than cooperating with God, using our reason, which is not only imperfect, but is tarnished, but is not gone in us. That the image of God is not destroyed in us.
Yeah.
And it sure. I mean, I always worried too. The way those reformers talk about our fallen nature, it just doesn't even sound like we're human anymore.
Sure.
And you wonder how God is redeeming the human race if we're like not even the same species as Adam and Eve, because we're so different than them.
So corrupted.
Yeah.
This is so fascinating because you see how in theology you can't get away from philosophy. They're intertwined. So you talk about Barth and his heritage from the Reformation and this kind of occasionalism and voluntarism. And his view of revelation is like you read the Bible and you kind of get zapped existentially, while you're reading it. But of course, Catholic doctrine of revelation is very different. Yeah. It's not opposed to reason. It's building on what you know from nature and so on.
Yeah.
So these go hand in glove, and so you can't extricate yourself from philosophical questions when you're in your faith life, when you're doing theology.
And getting this wrong has just huge practical implications. So I'll tell you something I've seen in my lifetime is most of the evangelical people I grew up with either left the church or became just kind of like many of them, sort of just kind of dogmatic, almost fundamentalist types. So especially when it comes to issues of like human sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking, as an undergraduate who loved Jesus and cared about these things, like, okay, so I have a certain aversion to homosexuality. Is there anything actually wrong with it? This is right in the heat of like the kind of the gay marriage debates as they had first started. And I didn't have the resources to think through those questions.
Right.
I just didn't have any resources to think through those questions apart from like, what does the Bible say? Mm-hmm. So it seemed clear to me that the Bible wasn't on board with homosexual activity. But also, as you know, scriptural interpretation is hard in terms of like, this is presented to other cultures in another language at different times. Like I don't know how to sort through all those things. But I think what was missing was any sense of natural law.
Yeah.
That we can think about what are our bodies for? We can think about sort of the teleology of our bodies and what are we oriented toward?
Theology
and
of the
what is
body,
any of this
too.
for?
Yeah.
Why do we sexually reproduce at all? What is any of this for?
Yeah.
And but when you don't have those resources and your only ethics is sort of like sifting through the scriptures to find some stuff. I mean, I'm glad for those that have held on to the traditional Christian teaching, because it seems kind of crazy that we would just like get something so fundamentally wrong for 2,000 years.
Right.
On the other hand, when you realize you can't justify this in any way, it also seems weird to just be so dogmatic about it.
Right.
This is just like an arbitrary rule from God or something.
Yeah.
And I think that, so this is what makes me sad sometimes is, so many evangelicals of my generation went to Wheaton, Westmont, Whitworth,
Sure.
Gordon Conway was at is that the undergrad institution? I mean,
Yeah, Gordon
do
College.
they have both?
I think.
Gordon College,
Yeah.
that's what I mean. And, those kinds of places. And we just didn't learn traditional Christian ethics.
Yeah.
Like what we learned was kind of the rules that had been around. We didn't really learn philosophically how these things were always grounded in the Christian tradition. And that meant when we encountered new and hard things and the culture seemed to be saying, you guys are bigots and this isn't fair to these poor people, we didn't know what to do. And I mean, I know dozens of people, dozens and dozens that I went to college with that are completely away from the faith now because they see Christians holding on to this rule that they think is totally arbitrary, and they think it's unloving and uncaring. And
there had already been the capitulation on contraception.
that made it especially hard for.
Yeah.
So one thing that's contributing is having no sense of like nature and knowing ethics by reason, only kind of by divine fiat do we really know ethics. And then the second thing is, they had already capitulated on contraception, and so most of the sex that they were familiar with was sterile.
Yeah.
Right.
And
And
if
so
it's
it just
sterile,
didn't,
then-
if it's sterile, then what was kind of the difference between homosexual acts and it just wasn't, it didn't feel like so they couldn't give sort of a principled distinction between these two kinds of acts.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. And so it's just devastating to me. I mean, I have just friend after friend who's left the church because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so sad.
And they just don't know any of the philosophical background, even though their parents paid to send them to Christian colleges.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
So it's important to have philosophy right. It's important to have theology right. They go hand in hand, and it's important to be in the right church.
Yeah. Yeah.
All these things are very important. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about, the relationship of philosophy and scripture. And I know that's, I was going to say that's not your thing, but in a way it is, because you're dealing with epistemology. You're dealing with how do we know things.
Yeah.
And so scripture, why do we treasure scripture? Well, one of the reasons we treasure it is because we believe it gives us knowledge about God, right? But somebody like Richard Dawkins would come along and say, why on earth are you looking to these Bronze Age myths to find out metaphysical truth? That seems so absurd, right? So are Christians irrational for taking this Bronze Age, Iron Age, Greco-Roman amalgamation, here, and this is a guide for our understanding of the way things really are,
Yeah.
So this is a very big question.
Yeah, no, I'd say a couple of things. The first thing that comes to mind whenever I hear a critique that something we shouldn't believe something because it's out of date or because it comes from too long ago, I just think, well, be careful what principles you establish, right? Because that means no one in 5,000 years should be caring anything about what Richard Dawkins says,
Okay.
Right? I mean, why do we really think our current science is going to last 5,000 years? There's a whole group of philosophers of science who basically, these guys are called pessimistic inductionists. Have I told you about these guys before? They think they think we have as good of a track record as you could possibly have for thinking that all of our current scientific theories are false.
Oh, so we have a defeater for all of our...
Yeah, because all the past ones were false.
Right, sure.
So they think,
I like these guys.
No, I think it's kind of funny. So you got to be careful. I mean, saying that something comes from too long ago to be true, it's like, first of all, truth doesn't exactly have an expiration date.
Right.
Now, it's fair enough to make a point. There is a point in there, which is like, well, you have to, when you're gauging a source, you have to think about how wise were these people and are they likely to know about truths in this domain or something? It's fair to question the source. But I just don't, there's no hard and fast rule on like expiration of truth, or Also, just the idea, I just think there's C.S. Lewis called this chronological snobbery, that we think anything that comes later is better because our new iPhone is slightly better than our last iPhone. So it's very tempting with modern technology to think that newer just equals better.
Right.
Although as you and I know, that's not even true in the realm of technology. I mean, anyone who's our age who remembers vacuum cleaners from the 70s, those things lasted those were wedding gifts.
Right,
now, in fairness, they cost like $2,000, but do you remember how long those things lasted?
Oh, yeah, you have your whole life. You would have your vacuum cleaner.
And do you remember your refrigerator? I bet you didn't change it growing up. You had one refrigerator growing up.
It lasted your whole life. Yeah.
I've been through multiple ones in our marriage, multiple.
You can't even buy a vacuum cleaner that will last more than a year now.
Yeah, and these refrigerators too, So it's just not true. First of all, even in the technological realm, that newer is always better. But certainly in the realm of ideas, there's no reason to really think that. Now, you might ask but also you ought to think about what kinds of truths the Bible's trying to teach us, and that these sort of truths about human nature, about ethics, about God, those just aren't the kinds of things that just easily change with time. If you want to critique the supposed, world picture of the firmament or whatever from Genesis, okay, but that right away that it gets complicated. What was it trying to? What did it say? What was it trying to actually teach? And yada yada. But even if you just wanted to critique that as they had this false scientific picture of the world, great. I mean, say that they did. What does that matter as to whether they're right about whether God exists or what's ethically true in ethics or whatever? Now, I just think we should question. I don't know. You should question the Bible like any other source. If you're coming to it without any information, you should ask, does this have a track record of success? I mean, this is what I ask myself for the church is like, does it have a track record of getting things right? I just found on thing after thing. And you get to a point where you realize, and same thing probably, it's the same thing with the scripture. There's a parallel. I got to the point where I realized I can't sort through all these issues. I mean, being an expert on one thing, you just know all the things you're not an expert on.
Right.
And so you just realize you could not get to the bottom. And this isn't just true of religion. This is like true of everything. You can't get to the bottom of everything.
Right.
And we can do our best on a bunch of things, but we're not going to get to the bottom of everything. And so what you do is you establish a relationship of trust with sources, right? And like I said, I pinned it down to two things finally, where I'm like, hey, I'm willing to grant them all this Mary stuff that I don't understand if they got the right Bible. That just felt more. So think of first things first. What's more foundational?
Yes.
Similarly with the Bible, does it get its basic claims right?
Right.
If these are claiming to be historical, like, is there such a place as Judea? And was there a pool of such and such there? And all this sort of stuff. Does it get its basic claims right? And that you can build up a track record of reliability. And actually, what boggles my mind is just. So one of the things you figure out, for instance, is like those Gospels had to be written by someone in that area.
Yeah.
And relatively close to the time period.
Sure.
Now, you can haggle about some exact dating. You know how difficult that gets. But this is not made up in the Middle Ages. This is not written by someone in Alexandria who's never been to Judea and doesn't know the topography and all this sort of stuff, where all the small details are, So you can build up a track record of reliability in those things by thinking about the most foundational things first. And like I said, with complex sources, you're never going to get to the bottom of every issue. But if you put first things first and think, is this generally a truth-telling thing? Well, then it's something you ought to listen to and take seriously, whether it's the church or whether it's the Bible. And I don't know, and I'm sure this is your experience too, but I just find on time after time, like there's a wisdom there that, it doesn't bother me at all that Richard Dawkins, fancy pants at Oxford, wants to dismiss this document that the whole rest of the world has found really meaningful and full of wisdom.
Okay.
To me, he's the odd man out. It just doesn't bother. It doesn't bother me.
But this is so interesting because on the one hand, that's a very practical rule of thumb. That's very commonsensical.
Yeah.
And yet it's also a position that you are defending at an academic level at the end of the day. Yeah, common sense and scholarly erudition can come to a reconciliation at the same place.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole sort of branch of philosophy that I find myself in is often called, common sense philosophy or common sense epistemology. And it basically, I think this goes back to Aristotle. One of these basic rules is something like start with common sense beliefs and the way things appear to most people, and defend those if you can until you can't anymore. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
so some people, I mean, you think of the difference even with Plato or other people, Descartes and others. Some people think the job of philosophy is to come along, and this is like the classic college professor of philosophy.
Right.
You get these impressionable 18-year-olds in your class, and you destroy all their beliefs. You know, like I'm just here to wreck your worldview. You know, because that comes with its own joys. But I can see why that's attractive. But I just don't think that's the job of philosophy, because what Thomas Reid, the great Scottish philosopher, points out is philosophy started out of common sense. Like we didn't start gaining beliefs once we started philosophy. We already had a bunch of beliefs. We started doing philosophy with more rigorous logic and rules to try to get clearer about the things that we hold or revise our opinions as we go. We're not trying to like figure out whether there is truth. Like any philosopher that's trying to figure out, is there truth? How would you ever do that without assuming that there's truth? I mean, there's no way to do that. And so we already know stuff. We know that there's truth. I mean, every 2-year-old, knows.
So this is like Socrates teasing the principles of geometry out of the 7-year-old or something like that.
Yeah. No, I think that doesn't work for other reasons. But to your point, exactly, we already know some things.
We know some things.
We already know some things. And so I just think it's a wrong approach to be like, we have to start all over every time we have a new question. Nothing can be taken for granted, and because of course one of the things is if we hold nothing steady, if we don't have any foundation, how would we ever figure anything out? So obviously we're taking some things for granted, like opposite propositions can't both be true.
Right.
Yeah. We're going to take some common sense stuff. Now those aren't arbitrary. We're not like taking them for granted out of nowhere, but we are going to take them for granted because you'd have to argue anything.
Right. Yeah.
And if someone denies that, we don't even have to give them an argument. Right?
Okay, right. Yeah.
Because they think it's true, but it could also be false at the same time. So
Right.
Yeah. So I think we've got to start with common sense, refine our beliefs as we go. When it comes to complex sources, start with your common sense. I mean, if you already know there are ethical truths and you encounter something purporting to be scripture that denies that there's any morality or something, throw it out.
That's a red
Commit
flag.
it to the flames, as Hume says.
Yeah.
Get rid of it. I mean, why would we don't? I just think we are like we said earlier. We already have kind of not only nature, but we have a lot of experience with the world. Now, that's not to say everything that's slightly counterintuitive we immediately dismiss. Right? We ought to think about the reasons for things. But if somebody tells you you're not living in the real world, there is no material world. The only interesting question there is how you know that's false.
Right.
It isn't an interesting question as to whether that's true. I don't think it's interesting at all whether that's true.
Okay.
I mean, it's just obviously not true.
Okay. So you're very suspicious about sweeping philosophical systems that want to deny our common sense impressions of reality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
I just think those people are more likely to be wrong than the rest of us.
Right.
There's a kind of just already an argument built in from the common consensus of how it seemed to all of humankind forever.
Okay. Okay. Which works very well with Catholicism.
Yeah.
Which is like the sensus fidelium.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and there's an old argument for even for God's existence from just the common consensus of how it's appeared to humankind. I also think I don't know if you've read Ross Douthat's new book called Believe, I think is what it's called. It's really, really good. But it's written largely for like New York Times kind of secular liberal people who know there's probably something spiritual going on in the world, and he's kind of trying to convince them just come a little further into the pool.
Right.
And it's really, I think it's super well done. But one of the arguments that he makes is something like this. If only, you find yourself realizing so most people have some sort of strange experience sometime in their life where they're like, wow, there's a little more to reality than materialism and what meets the eye. There's some sort of spiritual reality going on, but they don't know whether that's like Wiccan or crystals or whatever,
Sure.
And Ross's argument is something like, if only there were a couple of major documents that the entire world has culled for us, claiming to have all this, wisdom. And lo and behold, there is. I mean, there's not that many sources you really got to check out to see, to kind of see the built-up wisdom of humankind about thinking about spiritual reality.
Yeah.
There's a couple of main sources you might want to check.
Right.
And the Bible's just so obviously one of them that I just find it preposterous for Dawkins to dismiss it as like some Bronze Age, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Like, come on, this is even if you think it contains a lot of falsehood, you should be looking at that as a collection of documents that surely contains a lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
Not only practically about how to live, like in all these proverbs and things, but surely some wisdom about spiritual reality. How surprising would it be if millions upon billions of people
Right.
have found this ringing true in their experience?
Besides the fact that it was endorsed by Jesus Christ, who's arguably the most influential human being ever.
Exactly.
Just from like a historical perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like line up founders of world religions and philosophies.
Yes.
And like which of these is not like the other?
Exactly. Well, I think that's exactly right. I think especially when people are like, I don't know what to make of spiritual reality. Anything could be true, and I kind of want to say, well, there's like a couple documents and a couple people you ought to look into.
Right.
And I feel exactly like you do. Which of these ones is not like the other is what I was taught in Sesame Street,
Sure.
right? Or for instance, sometimes when it comes to arguments regarding the resurrection, people are like, act as though we just think this random dude, Jesus, was resurrected, and how stupid and arbitrary of us.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, he's like just, if anyone was resurrected, like a kind of prior probability before you come to the evidence for the resurrection, it actually really matters technically for the argument, by the way, that Jesus just has a higher probability of like being close to God than the rest of us. Right. Do you know what I mean? Because that makes it not arbitrary that he would be one to be resurrected here or to plausibly be the Son of God. And I think that's exactly what we find when we look at his life. He just seems really, really different. Different. So for people who've never really looked into the evidence and they don't know where to start with all the biblical archaeology and all this stuff, I mean, I think you'd probably give them the same advice. Like, just read the Gospels. In fact, I'd find one of those red letter Bibles and like pay extra attention. Yeah. So like when Jesus is speaking within those red letters, it'd just be like, wow, this guy's like whatever's going on, this guy's different.
Yeah.
This guy's very different.
It's interesting you should say that because my first Bible was a red letter King James.
Yeah.
And I just went immediately to the red. Bible. Yeah. Now, subsequently, my brother went to seminary and came back all erudite and said, well, they shouldn't put the words of Jesus in red because that, implies a difference. And it's all inspired, so it's all should have the same equal authority. But even as a child, I thought to myself, well, no, I mean, even the inspired author has probably treasured the very words of Jesus in a special way. So.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, it blew my mind when F.F. Bruce, in his book, when I realized that the so-called Apocrypha were in the King James. I was like, what? They were in the King James?
Well, they were in the King James, yeah.
What? That just blew my mind. And they just kind of gradually faded out over time. And through, like into the 19th century, the American Bible Society and stuff just ended up kicking these books out of the kind of the appendix to the Bible.
Right. That was kind of shocking and scandalizing.
Yeah. I was like, wait a minute. Who decided this?
Right. Although the biggest scandal for me was finding Augustine listing them in his on Christian doctrine. Yes. He goes, well, the canon is this, and Judith told, like, no, you too, Augustus.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like betrayed the cause.
Augustus,
yeah.
That's good.
So anyway, so this is very interesting. So, you had some background in Calvinism, and I probably more so because like very Dutch Calvinist background, and there's a certain school of Dutch Calvins that's very presuppositional, and you just assume to be true what you want to be true in a certain sort of way, but faith is a leap into the dark. And you get this in Kierkegaard too, and so on. But you wouldn't go in that direction. You believe in evidence.
I find that view just totally bizarre.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, I talk to Christian philosophers about this all the time, and they never know what to make. I literally was at a conference the other day, and I said, "Yeah, tell me about that guy again. Isn't he one of those presuppositionalists? What is the view?" And this is somebody that works with somebody who holds this view. And he's like, "I don't know." It's just such a bizarre view that somehow the view is something like, we're all just kind of stuck in our intellectual silos with like these paradigms, and we can never speak really to each other. I might be able to show you an internal contradiction in your worldview, but I can't ever like argue for my worldview, given your presuppositions.
It's almost a radical Kuhnianism in a way.
Yeah. And sometimes McIntyre's accused of having a view like this, but I just find that implausible. We argue with people all the time across big divides, and now, if one of us doesn't believe in truth or something, I mean, I suppose we wouldn't have much to say to each other. But notice we could still even argue about that.
Right.
We could argue about that a little bit and think it through together. I just don't think it's true that we're all in such different paradigms. Now, it is true that practically speaking, we have a hard time getting people to agree with us because they're coming from such different places with such different bodies of evidence and background beliefs and experiences that we have a hard time convincing other people that's true. And maybe some people get frustrated and then say, well, no one's ever convinced of anything. But, I just don't think that's true. I mean, you and I both changed our minds about things.
Right.
We both hold different paradigms about the church and scripture and other things. I don't think it's true that we never change our minds at all about things, or that we're sort of stuck in these like religious silos that are self-sealed and can't really say much to each other. I just don't think it's true. And I don't know why they want to go that route. It goes back to me, it does sound to me like it ties back into that larger Reformation worldview that we were talking about, where there's really kind of no nature and nothing we can know by reason.
Right.
So it's almost like we're receiving everything we know by divine revelation or something.
Yeah.
And therefore, if I've gotten revelation and you haven't, there's this never the twain shall meet.
I think another issue is you're holding a worldview that really can't compete if we just allow all the common sense evidence, to. I mean, how likely is it, that only Dutch Calvinists are? My brother, who's, as I was raised in Dutch Calvinism, as he was converting to Catholicism, he says, how likely is it a priori that just the Dutch Calvinists got it right?
I've been saying that for 30 years. Yeah,
it's just much more plausible that this huge Christian movement.
It just bothers me.
I
don't understand that view.
Yeah,
I do understand the general evangelical worldview where you think we've gotten some fundamentals correct, and we have our own particular views that we think are correct on top of that. But there is just a mere Christianity from the Bible that we all accept. But I've never understood thinking that somehow the Dutch got it right in the 17th century and now it's good. We got those canons and we're just like good. Right. I've never understood that. And by the way, this is why I think so many people are becoming Catholic too, is because certainly in my generation, I think it's true that we don't have the old ethnic ties that we used to have to like Swedish Lutheranism or Dutch Calvinism or whatever.
Breaking down.
As we intermarry more and more and we're just becoming more American and we're just not. We don't have those siloed communities anymore. So, and if you're evangelical, you end up experiencing a lot of good churches where you meet a lot of believers of different kinds, and you start to realize you just don't have the same loyalty to my little tiny group that you can really believe is the one true little group.
Yeah. And Catholicism makes sense and can fend for itself in an international pluralistic reality.
I always thought
there isn't a true church for everybody.
But if there was a true church, I was like, it would be the Catholic one. It's obviously just like huge and everywhere and has a real claim to universality.
Right.
I don't know much about Eastern Orthodoxy at all. Right. But one reason it's never been appealing to me is just because I just don't think it has that kind of universality.
It doesn't seem to be big enough to accommodate all cultures.
No, and it's like, what am I going to do? Be Greek? I'm not Greek. What am I? I'm not Greek. I'm not Russian. I'm not Turkish. Like, what am I?
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Right. My dissertation advisor, when he converted, he said right before I converted, I was Eastern Orthodox for 6 days. But then I had to choose a church, and I realized I didn't know where to go. And then he realized he couldn't have that kind of universality. I thought, that seems exactly right to me.
Yeah. It's I'm total agreement. Well, coming back to Scripture, so actually the historical evidence for Christ's resurrection and for the reliability of the Gospels, like F.S. Bruce does with on the New Testament documents, are they reliable? This is classic. Up until recently, I still assigned that in class, although there's some more recent books that are probably better now. He's a little bit dated, but building on him, Barnett. I use Paul Barnett now. It's just kind of I can't remember the exact name, but it's kind of an updating of Bruce's work. So that evidence is important for you.
Oh yeah.
In your worldview and your Catholic faith and so on, that we're not just, because the Pope says that this is Scripture, I take that on faith.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah. I mean, these are all sort of like preambles of faith that I think you'd have to think that these are reliable things before you can really, have faith. So, and faith just wouldn't be very plausible if some of those foundations weren't. So for instance, if Christian morality just didn't fit at all with common sense morality, or if there was just like nothing to be said for the historicity of the Gospels that were so, I don't think we should find it plausible. So I think we got to get those preambles right. Now, that's not to say though that like we don't have faith because everything's proven.
Right.
in some mathematical sort of way. Well, you and I just know everything there is to know about the archaeology of the Bible and all this. No, I mean, first of all, no one's in that position to really just know everything about everything related to the Bible. How could you? So to me, it seems that at a minimum, though, you need some reason to think. I mean, it could even just be using common sense to say, this is obviously a special book.
Yeah.
Okay. Like if any of the books in the world is divinely inspired, because again, with the sort of Dawkins critique, it's almost like they're saying, well, you just randomly believe this book to be inspired.
Well,
and
just
it's like
pick something off the shelf.
Yeah,
and
like
say, I think this is from God.
Yeah, the Encyclopedia Britannica from God. No, it's like no one. But doesn't the very fact that we're not doing that with all these books show that we're not doing something crazy here?
Yeah.
This is something that's just so obviously been part of a deep wisdom tradition for a very long time. So first of all, just coming to just it with common sense, we already know it's a different kind of book. There's something special about this. It's got to contain some truths. Now, what kind of truths those are, right? I mean, we want to know, is the Bible basically historically reliable and so forth? And I don't think you need to do a ton of deep research to know that. Mm-hmm. I mean, if it was just kind of, so I don't know, like when if the Book of Mormon's talking about Jesus coming to these Native American tribes, and we have zero archaeology, attesting to this, that seems bad.
Right.
But we know that there really was a people, a Jewish people. We know roughly when they were in the Holy Land and all this sort of stuff. This isn't so even apart, I guess, from real deep historical scholarly investigation, you already know that the Bible's not contradicting super common fact, well-known established facts regarding historical reliability and that sort of stuff. And then what I found is the deeper you dive into it, the more sort of things you find. Have you seen my friend Lydia McGrew's work on what does she call them? Coincidences of some kind?
Yeah, the
unintended coincidences.
Yeah, no, I
where
bought it
different
and
things
read it.
line up from different scripture passages that have nothing to do with each other, and kind of corroborate facts. So with works that are historical, you find that are truly historical, you find those sorts of things that they're converging on common ideas without intending to.
Yeah. I found this with the Dead Sea Scrolls, in my book Jesus and the Dead Sea Scrolls, that you've got these documents that are, we can carbon date them to the time period, and then they dovetail into little details of the Gospels that suddenly become explicable, like why is that young man wearing a single linen garment in Mark 14, 51 and 52, at the Garden of Gethsemane? Well, that's how the Essenes dressed. Yeah. And we find that out from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah. So it's very much like, what was her name?
Lydia McGrew.
McGrew, yeah. Which I bought that book on your recommendation.
Yeah.
And read through it. It was very helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's those. It's almost the little details that the Gospels and the Epistles get right speak more than some of the big things, because you could look up when Pontius Pilate reigned and try to write historical fiction. Yep. But little things like, well, a guy carrying a jar of water, and what would be going on with that? Well, he lives in a celibate male community.
Yes.
And so anyway, things like that. So this is very interesting. So there's a role for that.
Yeah.
Now, what about, there's been a critique of the possibility of revelation in the philosophical tradition. So you got Kant saying, well, you got the noumenal, you got the phenomenal. Yeah. They don't communicate. And for some reason, a lot of Western intellectuals bought that.
Yeah.
Did Kant have any good reason for denying that? Yeah. The noumenal realm can communicate with the phenomenal. And,
Yeah. Let's talk about how we got there. So the British empiricists were these guys like Locke and Bishop Berkeley and David Hume, and they were empiricists in the sense that they thought, as I do and as Aristotle and Aquinas do, that really our information is given to us through the senses. Mm-hmm. That's how we know things.
Right.
So unlike Plato and Descartes, Aquinas and Aristotle thought we learn things through experience. That's how we come to know stuff. That's how we get all of our ideas. We aren't preloaded with a bunch of ideas in the soul the way that Plato or Descartes thought.
Okay.
Plato thought we lived past lives, and that's how we gained all these ideas.
Okay.
He and many of the Greeks believed in reincarnation. And then Descartes was Catholic, and he just thought God just loaded us with all these ideas.
Uh-huh.
So that when you're born, you just kind of, you
have
know all these universal concepts, right? Like triangularity and circularity and dogness and treeness, like kind of the universal concepts behind things, what Plato called the forms, right?
Right.
Now, these British empiricists like Locke and Berkeley and Hume thought, yeah, we learn everything through experience. That seems right. And this tradition's really, really funny. Maybe it would take too long to recount this tradition, but it starts to end in a kind of skepticism, where by the time we reach Hume, we're such hardcore empiricists. Hume says things like this: "Will you never experience yourself as a single substance? You just experience various perceptions of things, ideas, thoughts, but you never perceive like your soul or spiritual substance, as Bishop Berkeley called it, Bishop Berkeley." And so it kind of ends in this kind of skepticism where it doesn't feel like we can know there's a material world. It was funny, they were trying to be empiricists.
Right.
But they start, like Berkeley starts to realize, yeah, but like I have all these like smells and sight perceptions, but why does there have to be a material world causing them?
Right. It could be a brain in a vat.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Well, even that would be material, but he just thought, well, God can just cause all of it directly.
Okay.
So maybe there's only like souls and perceptions, and God's keeping it a unified system.
Sure.
And things like that. And then Hume goes further questioning the existence of the self. And the material world. And so then Kant reads Hume and he's like, whoa, this is messed up. Like, we got to do something here. And he thinks he's going to like fix it all. But Kant makes it worse. Kant...
So like the history of philosophy, I'm going to fix it.
Yeah, he just makes it worse. I'll tell you why he thought it was better in a sec. But he basically ends up saying, sort of splitting the world in two, as you said. Mm-hmm. That there's a kind of world of experience.
Yeah.
And here's what he thinks. We have all these appearances, right? The phenomena. And our mind spits out certain conclusions or ideas from experience. And he thinks that our minds then must have certain like machinery that kind of spit out common experiences. So you and I both experience the world as though it has a flow of time. Mm-hmm. And so Kant says, whoa, I'm going to turn philosophy upside down, because Aristotle and everyone else previously thought that like, therefore time's a feature of the world.
Right. And
Kant says, no. Time must just be like a feature of our minds that we are adding to our experiences. Huh. So the mind is like a sausage grinder. No matter what you put in, it comes out the same shape.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
So the mind is shaping our experience. And this is obviously what leads to postmodernism and everything, right? Where he starts to realize that maybe the mind's very active. The mind isn't just passively receiving experience. The mind is adding to whatever's really out there to combine to produce experience of a certain kind, spatio-temporal experience.
Isn't there some truth to that?
Definitely. It's true that the mind is more active than many people have thought. But of course, you might start to worry. This is the reason the world gets split in two. Here is he ends up saying we can't say anything about the world, what the world is really like in itself, because we don't ever perceive the world in itself. We perceive through our experiences, and we're adding a ton of stuff to the mix in our experiences, so we never really see the world as it is.
As it is.
Right? Yeah. And so this is supposed to spell death for like metaphysics and the study of being as it actually is, the study of reality as it is. And the idea is that we only have access to our experiences, not to reality. But for him, by the way, he thought this is fantastic. Okay, so he positions himself as an anti-skeptic. You're gonna love this. Okay, he thinks he's an anti-skeptic because he views himself as sort of protecting God and the soul from, counterproof. Like, so he basically thinks by destroying metaphysics, he says we've left room for faith. So now he admits that we can't come in and sort of say that there is a God, or that the soul exists, or that there is real value. But neither can the skeptics prove that there isn't. So we get to just believe by faith. So it ends up being this very fideistic sort of, we get to believe by faith in God and the soul and that there are real
culturally
values.
Works with Lutheranism.
Yeah. And so he thinks he's saved everything by turning everything around and saying that we don't really perceive the world as it is. Okay, my quick thing is I just think he made it worse. The guy who actually solved it is the great Scottish philosopher Thomas Reid, who went back and tried to figure out what led to this chain of thought that ended in skepticism in the British empiricists. It turns out he thinks that John Locke, in the very beginning of his treatise on human nature, on our knowledge, basically, Locke in the beginning is like, hey, we were at Oxford with my buddies in our rooms, right, as one is, in the rooms with the pipes or something. And he says, we were having these heated debates, and I just realized we've got to drill down to the foundations of human knowledge and figure out what kinds of things do we even know? What kinds of things is it even possible for humans to know? And so at the very beginning, he says, okay, so we have minds. What kinds of things are in our minds? What do we perceive? And he says, we perceive ideas. And at the beginning, it just sounds super innocent. You're like, yeah, what else would be in our mind except our ideas? What else would we kind of be seeing and whatever except for these like ideas? These perceptions of things. But it turns out what he meant and what got traced through that ended in skepticism was the idea that we don't really perceive things. We perceive our ideas or our perceptions of things.
Okay.
So all the way back at the beginning of this British empiricism story, we kind of get a split.
Okay.
Where we often call this the veil of perception. Like there's a world out there, but I'm only really seeing kind of through a veil. In other words, he was sort of saying we only have access to our perceptions, which is kind of where Kant just ended up, right?
It's inside your head.
It's all just in our head. Now Locke is different than Kant though, because he thought he's a realist in the sense that he thinks there's a real world out there.
Yeah.
But he thinks that we infer that there's a real world out there because of all the perceptions we're having. Uh-huh. So I think there's really a tree out there because it looks like there's a tree out there. But he thinks I only really have access, direct access, to my perception of the tree. And so Reid just points out, yeah, we have no good reason to accept that theory. Why not just think we see trees?
Okay.
And he just
and that's your position?
Yeah, that's my position. We perceive trees.
Okay.
So we call this, so Locke's an indirect realist, so that he thinks we perceive reality indirectly by perceiving our own perceptions.
Okay.
I just think
That sounds like an infinite regression, though, right?
You might worry about that.
Okay.
I think, or you might just worry.
My perception.
Well, that's the other thing. It feels like it's almost higher order, like you perceive a perception, which is weird.
Yeah.
Why not just think that what it is to perceive a tree is to have a kind of mental representation where I'm aware of it? I mean, it's true that I can't perceive the tree except by having some imagery.
Right.
But that's what it is to directly perceive the tree. I mean, how else would it work?
Okay.
What else what does it mean to perceive reality without having any ideas or imagery or ideas? So what it is to perceive a tree is to perceive it by hosting certain mental impressions of the thing.
Okay. So there isn't a problem with God communicating to us.
No. So I don't think metaphysics is dead. I mean, he doesn't just think there's a problem with revelation. He thinks there's a problem with knowing that there is a God at all or any fundamental metaphysical truths about reality. Kant, that is. No, I just think we ought to reject that whole Kantian paradigm. And yet you will find most continental philosophers today and all these theologians that I don't understand are going around acting like we've got to deal with this critical question from Kant before we do anything. And it's like the first chapter of every book is about Kant. And it's like, you guys, this was just boneheaded philosophy that was solved in the 18th century by Thomas Reid. This is not, like, go back. Like, they just learn there's a certain kind of way of doing philosophy and theology where they think everything starts with Kant.
Okay.
And everything has to be a reply to Kant. And it's like, you guys...
It really doesn't.
No.
We don't need to take him seriously.
No, and us lowly analytic philosophers just don't think everything has to start with Kant.
Okay.
We have to talk to him before we talk to anybody else. No, we don't. We can. I mean, you ought to know something about it. It's an important historical episode, but there's no good reason to think that there's no God or that we can't know that God exists or that there's no genuine revelation because we can never get at these deep metaphysical truths. We don't have to separate the world in two because we see it directly.
Yeah.
I know that there's trees because I see trees. How else would it work?
Yeah. So when I was in seminary, there was, still a significant movement that thought that God's revelation could not be propositional. And I think that this had philosophical roots. Are you familiar with this at all?
I remember that this was some sort of debate. I don't remember what the reason for them holding that position was. Was it the...
So it's like God acts in history,
Yeah.
and we can witness His acts, like miracles
Yeah.
or so on. But but
It like
God's
can't be communicated
something like
propositionally or something?
Yeah, something like this.
I just
That's
don't
not
know what
something
that
you got
means.
into that.
I don't know what that means, and it sounds confused to me because I think our experience is also propositional. So when you look out at the tree, I think it seems to you that, and then comes the proposition.
Sure.
There is a tree.
There is a tree.
I think it seems that you are here in front of me, and my experience itself is propositional. Now, there have been a lot of philosophers, and this actually goes back to the discussion we were just having, that all the way back to Locke and a lot of these empiricists, and some people still think today, that at the bottom level, our experience is just this sense data stuff. And that's not propositional. So like an itch, the feeling of the itch is not propositional.
Sure.
And then you can turn it into a proposition like, I feel itchy or something.
Right.
But the foundation of our experience is just sensation. And I just think that's a mistake. I think our experience comes to us. Sensation prompts propositional content within us. So it is true that I'm getting certain visual sensations of light and wavelengths and whatever when I see the tree. But the human mind is built such that it automatically generates what philosophers like me call seemings, or you might just call them appearances, that have propositional content. So it seems to me there's a tree. It seems to me I'm here in this room and all. Now it's true that comes combined with a bunch of sense information, but we're not like animals who just have mere sense information. Because we have intellects that are rational, somehow that prompts within us, and philosophers have different stories about this, but that prompts within us these appearances that are already propositionally structured. If the foundations of your experience, if those guys are right, it wouldn't just be a problem for revelation, it'd be a problem for everything. So imagine that all you have access to are non-propositionally structured sense data, so like itches and smells and like just color spots, like pixels.
Yeah.
And then you had to mentally impose propositions on that content. That would be a really good reason to be skeptical. That's like Kant's thinking. It's like we're imposing meaning on like almost random chaotic sense data. You might really worry that the stories we're coming up with about there really being trees and stuff are not true because we've just imposed that on the real evidence or information. But that's why I think that's a mistake. Our evidence already comes to us propositionally. It's true that a parallel with it, or maybe prompting it, is this sense information, but the human mind is just propositionally structured. We perceive not just pixels. We perceive trees and whole objects. And so think about it like this too. The psychologists have discovered this in like perception theory. Even little children, when they see like a cat behind a fence, they see a cat. They don't see cat slices.
Right.
They see a cat.
Yeah.
The mind is built to perceive
Gestalt.
wholes.
Yeah.
The mind's built to perceive. Now, you could give a skeptical interpretation and be like, oh no, our minds are like the Kantian. Our minds are randomly primed to see. Or you could think, God's lined it up really well.
Right.
There really are distinct substances in the world, and our mind is built to become aware of them.
Yeah.
There really are propositional truths, and our mind is built so as to perceive them. We don't just have to infer them or lay them on top of the real non-propositional data that we receive.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. But it seems to assume concepts like proper function. Like there is a way that everything's set up to work, and
yeah, I think that's right. I don't like the Plantingian
know,
proper functionalist epistemology, but we all want to function properly.
Right.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily assume that. It at least just starts with it as the default. Until proven otherwise, you ought to think that our minds are fairly reliable.
Right.
Because and one reason for that is because if you start with like the Cartesian sort of the Descartes' default is like everything is guilty until proven innocent.
Right.
Imagine that we really started that way. Well, we don't even have to imagine it. Like Descartes did this thought experiment for us. Turns out you can't really know anything, or either very, very little or nothing, if you don't start with common sense. So people like me want to start with common sense and say that the way we perceive the world, the appearances, we ought to think that those are true until we have a reason not to. And this is the way we're all built as children. I mean, you know this, like children believe things that their parents tell them, and they'd probably die if they didn't.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
If they just were like, I don't believe in cars, even though my parents talk about them all the time, I'm going to run in the street, that wouldn't work, right? So we are built to trust others from the beginning, and we are built to trust the perceptions from the world until we have a good reason not to. And sometimes we find out that stick looks bent in water, but it isn't really.
Yeah.
And so we have to revise our beliefs as we go. But if we don't start with an attitude of default trust toward the appearances of the world, you're already in skepticism. How would you ever find your way out of it?
Right.
Because you can't trust any new appearances.
Right.
You know. So I think this is why I believe in kind of common sense view of philosophy and epistemology. Trust the appearances until you have a reason not to.
Yeah, which works very well with the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
And the handing on a tradition and a trust of the wisdom of the community and of your forebears and all of this. So as we wrap up, a couple of particular questions. So you're a professional philosopher. Philosophers know so much. I think there's a temptation to pride. That can be an occupational hazard of people in philosophy. Why does a philosopher need Scripture?
Yeah.
Don't you know you've learned how to reason it to everything? So
good
do I still need the book?
Yeah. Some philosophers do make it sound like that, right? Where they're like, we've just built up these systems, and it almost sounds like we know everything through these deductive systems, and we don't hardly have any need of any further input, right? I guess I'd say two things. Number one, we can only know so much. I mean, it's not like you and I think we need revelation to like perceive that we're on these beautiful chairs or whatever, like we don't, it's like we're randomly bringing in revelation to supplement knowledge we could kind of easily obtain by nature. The kinds of things we're talking about are where we've gotten indications that reality is more complex than we thought. Right. And unless we have help, we're not going to know much further about reality. I think most people, even most sort of secular liberal people, have had experiences that they know are strange, and they thought, "Whoa! I feel like I just got a glimpse
of a deeper reality."
That sort of Matrix moment where you realize there's something else going on than my everyday life. And that's the point where I think it's totally reasonable, to suspect that we could be given further revelation. And it's where philosophy's not gonna, philosophy can still help you sort through issues or figure out maybe how to wisely interpret your experience. But it's not like we're just gonna reason our way to figure out what this spiritual reality is, unless it kind of breaks through into our world and tells us. It's gonna be very, very limited. Right, and even in Aquinas says, for instance, when it comes to say like knowing God's existence, Aquinas thinks that in principle, some people, I think he thinks it's a very few people, can know for certain that God exists from things like the 5 ways.
Yeah.
He doesn't think everybody can do it. He thinks only after much, much study can a few people do it.
Yeah.
Like if you devote your life to this, you'll then be able to kind of see it.
Now, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
In Romans 1, Paul seems to imply that it's not that hard to figure out.
Good.
What do you think about that?
I think that that's right also. But notice that St. Paul doesn't mention any arguments.
Okay.
He just says people know this. Yeah. And I don't think that most people know it through any complex arguments. We kind of read arguments into that passage, but in Romans 1, what he says is that from the things that have been made, from the creation, people know that God exists and that he has power and etc.
Flanagan would say this is basic.
Yeah. Yeah. And if basic means sort of foundational, see, I think that that's a mistake if what that means is there's no further reasoning underneath that. Okay. So Flanagan thinks God's just built you so that when you look at a tiny flower, boom, it prompts these God beliefs.
Okay.
And what I think is, no, there's underlying reasons. So in fact, Flanagan's 3 examples are constantly things like the starry skies above, tiny flowers, majestic mountains. And he basically thinks God's built you with this inward divine sense that it's sort of like an input-output mechanism. Given the way you're built, when you experience those beautiful realities, boom, you get these God beliefs. Right. And I don't think that that's true, because I think that there are underlying reasons. In my dissertation, I think I said something like, here's my counterexample. Say you and I are driving out in the backwoods of West Virginia, not far from here, and we see a bunch of like rusty cars on blocks. Uh-huh. And God's so built us that every time we see rusty cars up on cinder blocks in a front yard, boom, we get these God seemings. It's like, boom, we believe in God. I mean, that would feel totally random, right? Okay. Which shows you there's something going on in those examples. And I think what it is kind of obvious. Those are beautiful and well-designed things that bespeak a kind of grandeur and beauty in the world that shouldn't otherwise be here if God didn't create it. So I don't think that when you see the flower and believe in God, I do agree with Plantinga that might be psychologically very immediate. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's immediate in the sense that you have no underlying reasons for thinking that the flower is evidence for God. It's beautiful, it's well designed.
Right.
It's unexpected on naturalism that there should be any such beauty and well-ordered design if the world was just kind of chaotic and no one's in control of it or designed it. So I think there are rational reasons underlying that so I think it's a very quick inference. I don't think it's basic.
Do you think that we infer things without being able necessarily to articulate all of the law? Yeah. So do I.
Absolutely. Yeah. And do you know who's really good on this is John Henry Newman.
Yeah.
Now Saint Newman.
Yeah.
And so
who you're working on.
Yeah, yes. I've been working on Newman for several years, and one of the things he's really good at is, so all the way back in the 1830s when he's still an Anglican, he's writing these beautiful sermons, which if you read these things, the Oxford University sermons, you just think, I can't believe anyone was sitting in a church listening to this treatise. But these are like, I can't believe these were sermons, Right. These were not pump you up, sermons. Right. These were like intellectual treatises on faith and reason and science. And he makes a distinction very early on between implicit and explicit reasoning. Right. And he says faith is always grounded in reason, but it's very often this implicit reasoning.
Right.
That you somehow see the beauty, the coherence. It fits really well with all your background beliefs, and so you can see it as true really naturally. But this happens in everyday life. Like you come home and your wife is home.
Yeah.
Do you ever have that happen and you're like, how do I know that?
Yeah.
And it could be, and sometimes you can't sort through all the reasons. Usually you can point to a few of them though. You're like, oh yeah, her purse was on that piano by the front door. Maybe there's a smell of perfume. Maybe a certain light was on that isn't normally. I mean, there's certain, or maybe the keys were hanging up, but you didn't like consciously notice them, but
right.
you did take that information in, and you can see how you very quickly came to believe that your wife was home. Now, usually we can articulate some of those reasons, but what Newman points out is we're not great at ever articulating all the reasons. I mean, what if I asked you to articulate all the reasons you have for thinking Reagan was president? Tell me why you really believe. Like the skeptic challenges you. Right. It's almost just laughable. And when you think about it, it's laughable not just because it's so hard, but it's laughable because you have too many reasons, not because you have too few.
Yeah.
And in fact, notice that it wouldn't bother you if you found out that some source, like what if it turned out like the Washington Post uncovers that one of their writers was like a Russian spy, and they were introducing all kinds of false information about Reagan in their articles in the 80s, and you read some of those. Like it wouldn't bother you that one of your information sources was bad. You still know there was a President Reagan because you have so many pieces of information. And so a couple of things. When it comes to our deep certitudes, what Newman points out is that it's very often that we hold those certitudes because there are so many underlying reasons. Not because there's like one killer one that we can prove to everybody.
Right.
And in fact, the strength of our certitude it's so strong because even if you took out several pieces of those evidence, it wouldn't even matter. It's so overwhelming that Reagan was president in the 80s. Right. I mean, everything you'd have to like be in the Matrix for that not to be true. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
So far removed.
Yeah.
Think about what it would take to knock you off that belief.
Yeah.
And so our certitudes normally work that way. And then also in terms of the articulation, there's a couple things going on there. One is you can have reasons without being able to articulate them.
Okay.
I do think if you can't sort of articulate to any of them at all to yourself over a sustained period of time,
that's a problem.
I think that becomes a problem. I think you notice it psychologically. You start to become less confident in whatever the belief was. If you can't think of any good reasons why we hold that belief. Right. And so I think naturally you would move off of that belief over time, which I think is the right thing. But your inability to immediately think of all your reasons, or even like many of them, is not good evidence that you don't have underlying reasons. The other thing that Newman is helpfully points out here is usually the recounting of reasons comes up when we're challenged. So it's kind of in a dialectical context. You've like challenged me, and now I've got to like all of a sudden give my reasons. And my inability to give you all my reasons or to convince you is not good evidence that I don't have good underlying reasons. Because some people are just skilled at that.
Right.
Some people just have a quick wit and quick memory recall, and they're able to conjure those up, the arguments and the reasons. And what Newman's partly pointing out, though, too, is that arguments are typically meant for others.
Okay.
Now, inside me, I have a bunch of reasons and evidence, but I don't normally like formulate syllogisms like for the fact that my wife loves me or how I'm going to vote or something, you know?
Right.
I do have reasons, but we normally only assemble those reasons and arguments to package them easily for others. And notice that when we do so, we usually have to include reasons, only some of our reasons, namely the ones that the other person might accept.
Right.
Which can sometimes make it look weaker than it is. So let me just give an example, like with God's existence, think of all the reasons you have for believing in God's existence. From inner things you've felt in prayer, to your historical studies, to the love you've experienced through your family, all these things, maybe answered prayers, all these things come together. But if a random atheist on the street thrust a mic in your face for their TikTok channel and they're like, why do you believe in God? What would you say? You'd probably like talk about like certain arguments, the Kalam cosmological argument or something.
Yeah.
And I do think that plays some role maybe in why you believe in God.
Right.
But your reasons are much broader than the subset of reasons you would give to other people for their consumption to try to convince them. And that's really helpful to think about that difference.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we think we have less evidence for God or for the faith than we do. We actually have a lot more in all of our experience. Yeah. It's just that experience isn't easily packaged or acceptable to other parties.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, so can you think? Obviously, having good philosophy is important for having good theology.
Yeah.
And the church knew this. And in the Middle Ages, you learned philosophy first before going on to theology.
Yeah.
And in evangelicalism, oftentimes that's skipped. You jump right into the Bible without having a good philosophical grounding for things like hermeneutics and so on.
Yeah.
How philosophically literate does the lay Catholic have to be to navigate the modern world? Not everybody can be a professional philosopher like yourself.
No, there are different parts of the body, and C.S. Lewis has
but some would help, right?
Absolutely. C.S. Lewis has that great essay on learning in wartime, that I always think of, which is, he basically says, like, why would anybody be going to Oxford during the Great War?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, because someone's gotta.
Yeah.
Because we don't give up all we can't just give up all our ideas and wait till there's perfect world peace before we. Right. Some people are called to study these things for the rest of the body.
Oh, for sure.
And so I don't think that everyone needs to have your depth of knowledge of the Bible, or know the things that I know about the history of philosophy or something. In order, it would be helpful when they're talking to others to be able to bust some of those things out. And that's why people watch podcasts and they're gaining information to do those sorts of things. So I think it's helpful. I don't think it's strictly necessary, certainly for faith or for a deep faith. There's many simple people over many centuries that I think probably have way deeper faiths than you or me, and they've lived in hard circumstances and have had access sometimes to priests even and things. Yeah. And so God bless those people who believe without those things, and God probably provides for them in a direct way. But I do think that, say, background philosophy like in metaphysics helps you avoid really simple errors. So again, just confusion about appearance versus reality, the kind of thing we've been talking about. Sometimes theologians get hung up on that. Or when it comes to understanding why the church would teach what it does about bioethics.
Yeah.
I remember first learning that the church thought that IVF was wrong, and I was like, what? That's weird. Why would they think that? Babies are good.
Right.
Because I didn't have any of the background metaphysics. I didn't understand those arguments at all. And so it definitely helps to understand. Now, you can believe and hold everything that the church teaches without understanding all the deep underlying reasons, and that's perfectly acceptable. In fact, it might be even more honorable to God in a certain way, right? That
Sure.
bless those who believe without seeing.
Right.
They don't sort of have the direct apprehension of why this or that is right or wrong, and yet are trusting God based on the things that the light that they have been given on certain things. So so it's certainly not necessary for faith or for a deep faith, but boy, does it help just kind of provide a kind of intellectual satisfaction. I think the best argument for Catholicism is the way all this fits together from just good underlying common sense philosophy that builds naturally up to ethics to then understanding how revelation and Christian ethics fits with that, why God would command some of the things that he does. Boy, that's just so much more satisfying to have that background knowledge. So it's easy to go wrong without it if you're doing intellectual work.
Yeah.
And number two, it creates a kind of intellectual satisfaction where you see so many truths converging. And that's when go back to Newman. That's when you know you've really found the truth. It's not when you have one kind of killer piece of evidence for something. Because you always feel a little unstable when you just got that one.
Right.
But it's when you see multiple legs of a stool kind of converging in the same direction, you're like, whoa, this is a beautiful whole, this is why a lot of people are attracted to the faith even without being able to articulate it this way. But there's such a beauty in kind of this synthesis of philosophy, theology, ethics, all this stuff sort of that hangs together in this beautiful, harmonious way that you're like, this must be divine. Right. And a lot of people sense that without being able to articulate all the underlying things.
And they have a confidence. And way back in your journey, when you're when you're in D.C. and you're meeting these Catholics for the first time, and you raise problems and they're not bothered, you sense that they had this kind of confidence in their epistemological framework because they saw a convergence that if they see an anomaly over there, like, well, that's curious, and like I want to resolve that eventually, but it's not like going to shake up my whole foundation.
No, because the foundations are strong because there's kind of this seamless whole that's winsome, beautiful, hangs together. It's historically grounded. Wasn't made up yesterday. You don't have to be like Dutch or Greek to, be feel part of this tradition. I mean, so I think people sense that even without having a deep knowledge of it. But I do think for people listening, it's worth, if you have time. So for instance, I direct a Catholic Studies program, a Master's in Catholic Studies that's fully online that really, the whole point of it is to catch people up on this kind of stuff.
Sure.
Like background in basic theology, philosophy. We make people take an art class so they understand why beauty is such an important part of our
tradition. This leads to a master's? Or?
This is a master's in Catholic Studies. I view it as a master's for people, especially that didn't get like a good Newman Guide School undergraduate
education
formation, where you started to see how this all fits together: philosophy, theology, beauty, and those sorts of things. And for older people that I mean, you and I really, I know you believe in this like I do. Christian education is important.
Sure.
Like young people can be really excited about their faith right now, but if they don't go learn something about its intellectual foundations, then it's going to sound really convincing to them when people are like, "Why are you being so mean to these poor people?"
Right.
They, these poor girls inside of boys' bodies. Why are you so mean to them and so bigoted? And why can't you just be nice and inclusive? And if you don't have any background, you're kind of like, man, I want to be nice.
Right.
Yeah.
So
to me, it's a plea for maybe not the necessity in the sense of, I don't want to say it too strongly, right? Because it's not like to have faith, you have to understand all these things.
Right.
But boy, does it help you see the coherence.
Yeah. When
you know some of the more basic philosophy and theology, how it hangs together.
Yeah.
And it can help sustain your faith in difficult times.
Yes.
Because what I tell a lot of my students is like, you might be all happy-go-lucky right now because you're at the Steubenville woo-woo conference,
Right.
And that's great. I love that. Keep doing that. But at some point, you might find yourself without a bunch of Christian community.
Yeah.
You might find yourself in what feels to you like a dry and boring parish.
Yeah.
And what's going to sustain you is that this is historically true.
Mm-hmm.
And that this is like the only serious and coherent, well worked out theory of like ethics.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there like isn't another good option.
Yeah,
like the other option to me is nihilism.
Yeah.
That's
very true.
It's like the church or Nietzsche largely in my mind.
Father Spitzer helped me to reason for myself to God's existence. In some very profound ways, and even in moments of doubt, I doubt. Sometimes I have like personal doubt of God's affection for me that can be fleeting, but I never really doubt that God exists. I'm
I
like,
don't
no,
either.
it's just like confounded irrational to believe anything else.
No, I don't at this point either.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
It's-
no.
but,
There's just too many good reasons, and they
yeah.
all kind of converge in the same direction.
yeah. But okay, so 2 or 3 books on philosophy for a lay Catholic that you think would be helpful.
Boy, yeah. You know, if you're trying to understand some of that background, like ancient philosophy, so that you can start to understand some of the background of some Aristotelian assumptions, like in Aquinas, I think Mortimer Adler's little book, Aristotle for Everybody, is like the most readable philosophy book ever written.
Wonderful.
It's just
Mortimer-
so simple,
Mortimer Adler's-
really short chapters, help you absorb the key concepts that the church kind of relies upon a lot of times about, you know, art versus nature and substance and accents and those kinds of fundamental concepts that we talk about in metaphysics. What else would I recommend? I think, honestly, sorry to stick with the Aristotle theme, but just background, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics is readable. Now, Aristotle's a little hard in this sense. His works were not these polished works that he wrote for everybody. They're largely his lecture notes, either his or other students. And so they don't flow perfectly.
Sure.
But I think you'll find that it's not a super hard thing to understand. And if you're trying to understand the background, like why does the church think that ethics is just kind of knowable from nature? It's like you just can't do better than reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. So he basically establishes that like nature has these patterns of order, and we make judgments about like a good deer, like a healthy or an unhealthy deer, you know? Like if it has 3 legs, we're like, oh no, something's wrong.
Right.
So we kind of make these judgments about good and bad, and so we can sort of start to derive these concepts of good and bad from nature, and the church, of course, builds on that later on. And then a third one, I might mention a book that I wish there was a Catholic equivalent of this, and I should write one someday. But one that I think is still kind of helpful for people, even though it's from a sort of evangelical perspective, is James Sire's book. Do you remember that book on worldviews?
The Universe Next Door?
The Universe Next Door.
Yeah.
I think it's so helpful if you're kind of thinking
James Sire,
through.
sure.
It's one of these philosophical books that helps you think through a little bit. What are the basic worldview options? Because what you find when you look at the world of philosophy, it can be kind of overwhelming. There's all these different subject areas, metaphysics and ethics and all this stuff. But really, in terms of your life options of like, how am I going to live and what am I going to believe? The truth is, the wisdom of the ages has distilled these into some pretty distinct packages.
Yeah.
You know, you could be kind of a scientific naturalist or nihilist or like an existentialist or, you know, a Christian theist or a Muslim. Like there's only so many kind of real overall So it isn't like, some people think they can just pick all their own beliefs, but you'll end up with a random hodgepodge of stuff that doesn't really fit together. Or you'll converge on one of these worldviews accidentally, right? And so it's one of those books that helps you compare worldviews a little bit by asking some really fundamental questions. For instance, what's the most basic reality? Like, is matter or something like mind more fundamental and basic?
Right.
What comes first? Is nature orderly or chaotic? Like really ground level questions to sort of build up, and depending on how you answer these questions, you can see sort of these different coherent overall worldviews. And it's one book that might help you dialogue with some of your neighbors real well when you start to realize, oh, I sense that my daughter is now into this kind of postmodern worldview where they're questioning 2 or 3 really basic things that I thought were really settled. So it could help us talk to each other a little bit from these from our different perspectives.
Yeah. Okay, James Sire.
Yeah.
Universe Next Door.
That's right.
Yeah, awesome. Dr. Logan Gage, it's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. We'll have you on again, I'm sure. Go deeper into
Good.
some of the other specifics. Newman, for example,
Yeah,
that would be a
sounds
whole
good.
world into its self. So.